Hello and welcome to Hidden Dusk, a place where the night grows quiet and the shadows begin to tell their stories. Before we begin, dim the lights, get comfortable and relax. And if you enjoy calm and eerie stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let the darkness guide you into tonight's story. Warm water streamed from the slender spout of the porcelain pot and splashed into the cup I held between my palms. At first the liquid looked clear, but when the thin waterfall thickened I saw faint swirls of green drifting through the teacup like watercolor paint. The cup became heavier, and the heat seeped into my skin until I almost had to let go. A damp, earthy scent, sage, pressed under a heavy stone, left in midday sun, then brewed, rose on little curls of steam and drifted through the quiet room. My therapist lay, tilted her wrist to end the pour, placed the pot on its saucer, and leaned back in the padded chair across from me. A muffled clink sounded as clay tapped wood, but even that was hushed by the deep roar of Atlantic waves beating the rocks outside her office windows. Her office sat on the second floor of a cedar-shingled house 30 yards from the tide line. Floor-to-ceiling glass filled one wall. Even in stormy weather the windows let in so much gray, rolling light that I sometimes forgot we were inside. That day the sea looked bruise-colored, all purples and blacks, but strips of silver flickered when breakers curled and snapped. As I watched, foam washed up the beach and slid back again, dragging strands of eelgrass. I felt the rhythm in my rib cage. Lay clicked her pen. The sound was soft, yet it cut the hush like chalk against slate. This kind of weather would feel especially gloomy if we didn't live beside the sea, she said, flipping through what I assumed was my chart. Though her voice was gentle, the words seemed to float in the air without touching any other sound, as though waves, wind, and would all held their breath for her. Yeah, I answered. We're lucky to be near the ocean. My own voice sounded small, like it had traveled a long way only to run out of momentum right at the edge of my lips. I turned the cup in my hands, hoping the scent of sage would unzip something tight inside my ribs. Lay crossed one knee over the other and rested her pad on a linen-covered leg. From behind her frames, her dark eyes studied me. So, she began, tapping the pen on the paper so softly that I heard it more in my bones than in my ears. Tell me about the nightmares. Has anything changed? I looked down at the tea. Steam drifted against the pale ceiling, making the air above the cup shimmer like summer pavement. The smell still reminded me of dusty corners in my grandmother's kitchen, where she stored jars of dried herbs labeled only with crooked pencil. The nostalgia was comforting, yet embarrassment nipped too. Every week I sat across from Lay and wished I could give her a triumphant answer. Yes, I slept straight through the night. Yes, the bad dreams stopped. But each week my answer stayed the same. I used to worry that I was letting her down. Lately I worried I might be letting myself drown. I wake up feeling disturbed, I admitted. As soon as the words left my mouth, my throat felt raw. Lay's eyebrows drew closer, a small frown of sympathy. Then she scribbled a note. I knew she wouldn't judge me, but years of private shame made me read too much into every gesture. I brought the cup to my lips and sipped. The tea scalded in a sweet way, a pain that promised relief behind it. My fingers curved tighter around porcelain. I'm sorry to hear it, Nami, Lay said. She waited. Silence unfurled. I heard the surf pound again. I heard gulls cry, even though none roost on the window ledge. I felt the couch beneath me, soft, cloud-colored, the upholstery sinking slightly under my hips. I tasted sage and salt on the back of my tongue. With every sense I tried to anchor myself so the panic would not float me away from my own body. Lay watched until I steadied. Nami, she asked, have you ever heard of lucid dreaming? I blinked. No, I haven't. It's when a person realizes she's inside a dream at the very moment she's dreaming it. Lay leaned forward, voice gaining a precise energy. When you know you're dreaming, you can change the story. That can turn a nightmare into something less terrifying. Sometimes it becomes an adventure, sometimes it becomes therapy. She smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. Athletes picture winning a race. Musicians rehearse pieces they'll play the next morning. Lucid dreaming has many uses. I tried to picture myself standing inside my worst nightmare, fully aware that everything around me was made of sleep and fear. Could I stand and look at the things that chased me? Could I change the color of the sky or step through the locked door that always appeared in the last corner? The idea filled me with equal parts dread and urgency. Lay's pen clicked. "What's happening in your mind right now?" she asked, gentle. "It feels like a stretch," I said. "It's not that I doubt you, Lay. I've never had a lucid dream. I don't even know where to begin. It can be taught." She said those words the way she might say, "The tide will rise." Not a promise, an observable fact. The cup shook slightly between my palms. I realized I'd been gripping it harder as she spoke. I set it down on the low table between us and watched rings of steam fade. From the window, a sudden gust rattled the glass. Behind the house, the sky deepened to violet, warning of heavier rain. Inside, Lay's office remained soft-lit and still, as though sealed inside its own bubble. I pictured that bubble floating on storms. Maybe, I thought, I can learn to float on my own storms too. That night, back in my apartment several streets inland, I hunted through drawers and boxes for an unused notebook. I found a spiral-bound pad from a biology course I never finished. I tore out pages of doodled cell diagrams until only blank sheets remained. I placed the notebook and a pen beside my pillow, exactly as Lay instructed. "First rule," she had said, "write your dreams the moment you wake. Memory is slippery. Grab it before it dives back under." According to her studies, a strong habit of dream recall planted the first flag on the road to lucidity. Before bed, I sat cross-legged in dim light and breathed slowly. I repeated a single sentence in my mind. "Tonight, I'll know I'm dreaming." Each repetition felt slightly emptier than the one before, like copying a phrase so often it dissolves into scribbles. But Lay said intention mattered more than belief. When my chest felt tight with the usual dread, I resisted the temptation to escape into my phone. Blue light, she warned, dragged the brain out of natural rhythms. So I snapped the phone off, slid under sheets, and waited for sleep to claim me. When it came, it was sharp and fast, like stepping from a ledge into water. And when I jerked awake sometime after midnight, sweat soaked the back of my shirt. Heart galloping, hands numb, chest buzzing, nightmare aftermath. I scrambled free of the damp sheets, stumbled to the small balcony, and shoved the sliding door open. October air slapped my face. I gripped the railing and let the wind press hair against my cheeks until my breath slowed. I could not see the ocean from here, yet faint tangles of salt and fish rode the breeze. Maine air always carried the water inside it, even miles inland, like a promise no one could break. When I finally crawled back to bed, I noticed the notebook untouched. The dream had slipped away. I wrote the date anyway and scribbled. Something terrifying. Running maybe. Heart pain. That was all I had before exhaustion dragged me down again. By the next session, dark half-moons adorned my face. Lay poured the tea, lavender this time, and listened. I told her the nightmares still cracked me open nightly, that the notebook mostly held frantic scrawls. I tried to sound hopeful. At least I wrote something each time. Lay nodded. "That's progress," she said. "Remember, training for lucidity is like strengthening a muscle you didn't know you had. It takes daily practice, but the brain adapts faster than we think." "How does the practice feel separate from the nightmares?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. The lavender steam filled my nose. The bitter taste coated my tongue. "I guess," I said slowly, "I dread bedtime less. The routine feels like preparing for something challenging but possible, instead of waiting for an ambush." Lay smiled, content. She didn't promise an easy path. She never did. She only added a few tools. Set alarms to perform reality checks during the day. Ask yourself, are we in a dream? Reach for light switches, glance at clocks. Details often warp inside sleep. With habit, she said, the mind would repeat the test during dreams and recognize the difference. So I did. I tapped walls, flipped switches, stared at digits on my phone until they stayed steady. I drank less coffee, spent evenings in quiet. The nightmares kept coming, but memory of them thickened, gained texture. I could recall shapes, voices, sometimes whole scenes. On good mornings, I filled pages with details. On bad mornings, I still wrote the date, even if the rest was only 3 words. Fear. Running. Awake. One starless night weeks later, I woke again, trembling. The clock flashed 12:37. My skin felt submerged in electric needles. Instead of pacing or scrolling my phone, I brewed chamomile in the kitchen. I wrapped myself in a knit sweater and went to the balcony, mug in hand. The street below was empty except for parked cars. Porch lights burned gold in dark windows. The ocean roared faintly, beyond sight but close enough for the pavement to taste brine. I breathed until the shaking eased. The nightmare memory was stronger than usual. A hallway narrowing into black, doors lining each wall, and at the end a mirror reflecting not my face but an empty void. I wrote it down by moonlight. The act of naming it made the image less threatening. That mattered. Maybe small victories stacked into larger ones, the way sand became shoreline. Another week passed. Lay's office smelled crisp, like new rain on slate. She served hibiscus blend, scarlet in porcelain. As steam touched my nose, I noticed an odd tang salt. Lay poured her own cup and sipped. "Sea water," she said calmly. I infused it with petals. My stomach pitched. "You brewed tea in sea water?" She nodded, no apology. Her eyes gleamed with an amusement so subtle it perched between mischief and encouragement. I stared at the red liquid. I pictured seaweed and plankton swirling in each sip. Yet Lay's confidence steadied me. If this was a test of lucidity while awake, something intentionally strange, maybe accepting it would train my reflexes. I raised the cup. The hibiscus tasted tart, metallic, a hint of brine beneath citrus. Realization bloomed like a flare. The oddness was too perfect, too pointed. I set the cup down and laughed. The sound surprised me. "This is a dream," I said aloud. Lay's smile widened. "Congratulations." I pressed my hands against the couch to anchor myself. Summoning the 5 senses checklist, I inhaled deeply. Salt, ink, damp linens, sage ghost lingering on the cups. Sight. Outside, the storm clouds split, revealing shafts of gold sunlight like doors to somewhere holy. Touch. The couch fabric felt softer than cotton, more like clouds spun between fingertips. Taste. Hibiscus, brine, sweetness. Sound. I listened and caught distant gull cries and waves smashing rock. I was dreaming, yet I felt grounded. The fear that usually screamed inside my nightmares cowered somewhere small and manageable. If this were truly a dream, I decided I would test the boundaries. I stepped toward the windows. My fingertips passed through glass as though sliding through cool water. On impulse, I leaned forward, and the rest of my body slipped through too, no resistance. Outside, instead of crashing onto rocky shore, I hovered in salty air. The sea stretching below glinted with impossible shades of turquoise and amethyst. I grinned and dove. Wind tore joyfully at my sweater, but when I met the surface, the water welcomed me. No slap, no shock. I opened my eyes and saw shafts of light dancing through green depths. Bubbles rolled from my mouth, but when the impulse to breathe came, I inhaled water like air and felt no pain. I swam until I reached an open space that felt like the midpoint between seabed and sky. Above me, waves rippled. Below lay darkness. I flipped onto my back. Water held me like a warm sheet. Up through the trembling surface, I saw not her office building, not clouds, but a spiral of stars turning slowly. Maybe entire galaxies. They cast silver rays into the water, and around them the void of space looked soft, inviting. A sense of power unfurled inside my chest. Gentle power, not violent. I was safe. Terror was distant, manageable. A tamed creature on the beach watching me swim. I felt tears mix with salt water as relief replaced adrenaline. That was the dream that changed everything. Days afterward, I began to bite into nightmares before they swallowed me. I'd noticed the wrong number of fingers on my hand or letters melting off a street sign. Oh, I'd think, here again. The black hallway appeared, but when the mirror stood at its end, I chose a different door. The door opened to sunlight and meadow instead of void. I named the scene aloud meadow. I made grass bloom under my feet. The hallway dissolved. I filled notebooks. Some nights lucidity slipped. Others felt like rehearsals before an empty theater. Yet even on failure nights, I woke less shaken. My body started trusting the bed, trusting sleep. Months later, I met Lei for what might be our last scheduled session. I arrived rested, cheeks warm with color. She poured white tea. No sea water, she laughed, and asked, "How does the world look now?" "Like a place where walls bend if I knock kindly," I answered. She liked that. I told her about the hallway transformation. I told her I dreamed of rusted ships buried in coral gardens and danced with fish shaped like ribbons. I told her nightmares still visited, but I carried a lantern now. Lei tapped her pen. "Do you remember the first lucid dream?" she asked. "Hibiscus seawater," I said. "Your secret." She shook her head. "It was never my secret. Your mind brewed that tea because it knew a rule had been broken. You taught yourself." When the session ended, I stood at the window alone. Storm-colored clouds passed, but I saw sunlight threading through, illuminating wave crests far out where the ocean's skin tensed over hidden ridges. I pressed my palm to glass that felt solid, but I still remembered walking through it. Maybe I always would. That night at home, I performed my routine: journal, breathe, ask the question, "Am I dreaming?" over and over like beads sliding on a string of prayer. I slept. A nightmare approached, wearing one of its old masks. I felt its chilly presence, watched the hallway appear. I smiled. I looked at my hand, 6 fingers. Dream. I walked forward. The mirror waited again. Within its silver, I saw swirling clouds, lightning, the face of fear. I touched the glass. It rippled. I stepped through. On the other side, I found a beach at dawn. Waves licked my toes. A woman in shimmering wings bent near the water, searching. I knew her story. I knelt beside her. "It's here," I said, and dipped my hand beneath a clear wave. My fingers closed on a silver chain fine as spider silk, moon pendant no larger than a thumbnail, crystal like a tear. I placed it in her palm. She looked up, and for an instant she had Lei's eyes. Then she smiled. She fastened the chain around her neck. Tide surged, lifted us both. And as our feet left the sand, I breathed the salty air and felt sunlight bloom behind clouds, just as it did in waking life. When dawn lit my real window, I reached for the notebook and wrote every detail until my wrist cramped. Outside, the horizon shimmered pink. The gulls cried. The tide kept its eternal rhythm. And inside me, something that once cowered had learned to stand tall and sway with the pull of the moon, knowing the difference between sea water and tea, and knowing sometimes they could be the same. I pushed open the front door a little earlier than usual and called the one word that had always felt as safe and steady as my own heartbeat. "Mom, I'm home." The hallway threw my voice back at me, a thin echo that reminded me of the way empty gymnasiums sounded on rainy afternoons at school. The word home slipped past my lips just as it always had, but something about it felt loose now, like a button hanging by a single thread. A second later, Mom hurried from the kitchen with her arms already open for a hug, her favorite flower-patterned apron tied around her waist. Her embrace was warm and smelled faintly of garlic and rosemary. A welcome so familiar it should have glued that dangling button back in place. Yet, as she pulled away and smiled, I felt an odd tug low in my chest. A quiet signal that told me the word home no longer fit as snugly here as it once did. A moment later, Dad appeared at the top of the basement steps, leaning a little on the railing the way he always did when he was halfway through one of his weekend projects. He wiped a bit of sawdust from his sweater, smiled, and then settled against the kitchen counter so he could pepper me with questions. The questions were familiar: a tumble of curiosities about my classes, the search for a decent internship, whether I had found a reliable mechanic for my old car, and on and on. Dad's voice had that rolling rhythm I grew up with, equal parts steady concern and gentle teasing. Chicken sizzled in Mom's heavy cast iron pan behind him, snapping like tiny fireworks, and green beans tapped against the wooden spoon each time she stirred them. Everything in the room felt safe, and yet a thin thread of unease managed to weave itself through the sound of their voices and the crackle of the stove. It was like an itch buried too deep under the skin to reach. Our old dog wandered in on quiet paws, his stiff hips making each step slow but purposeful. His teeth peeked out in a crooked grin, and the curtain of shaggy hair over his eyes bobbed with every sniff he gave the air. As soon as he pushed his head under my palm, I bent and scooped him up. He remained as sturdy as ever, though his weight no longer brought me the playful surprise it used to. The softness of his fur under my fingers was an anchor to all the years that had come before, and for a breath or two, the unease faded. Mom mentioned that he had begun eating only if his food was arranged in certain patterns. Half the kibble pushed to one side of the bowl, the softer bits on the other, and that she had scheduled a vet visit for later in the week. As she spoke, the strange, restless feeling settled again onto my shoulders, prickling like static. Before I could examine the knot in my chest, the front door swung open with a cold gust of November wind, and my little brother strode across the threshold. The entire house seemed to notice the shift in energy. Dad abandoned the counter. Mom set the pan aside, and we all rushed forward as though he had been away for years, not months. The nagging twinge in my stomach tightened. Dad asked about grades and the latest results from track meets. Mom inquired about his girlfriend, reminded him to call more often, and nudged him about the unfinished paperwork for next semester. I stayed behind them, waiting for my turn, trying to read the lines of tiredness and hope on my brother's face. He hugged me on his way through, and I realized he had grown again, just enough that I now had to tilt my chin upward to meet his eyes. Mom insisted he had stopped sprouting back in his freshman year of college, but I could feel the difference in the length of his arms around me. That night, after the dishes were stacked in neat shimmering towers beside the sink, my brother and I settled on the couch with a bowl of buttery popcorn balanced between us. The living room lights were off except for the soft glow of the TV and the gentle twinkle of the old holiday lights Dad never bothered to take down. Halfway through a comedy we had both watched a dozen times, laughter falling into an easy rhythm, my brother leaned sideways against the sofa cushion. His voice was low so it wouldn't catch Mom's attention in the hallway. "Sis, how did you fight the silence when you first moved out?" I chewed a kernel, swallowed, and searched for a truth that would land gently. "I wrote," I said at last. "Little things, lists, poems, scraps of half-started stories. Or I painted old coffee mugs with cheap acrylic just to keep my hands busy. The trick was picking something that didn't matter if it went perfectly or not. I only needed to keep the loud thoughts from wandering too far." He stared at the TV, nodded once, then dared to press the question again. "And if that didn't work? Sometimes?" I answered softly. I cried until I fell asleep and told myself that morning would feel better even if nothing had changed. My honesty made him chuckle, though his eyes shone briefly in the shifting light. We didn't say more. Our attention drifted back to the screen, but the popcorn bowl became a battlefield for a while, each of us grabbing handfuls and defending our territory as though laughter alone could keep the dark corners of the room at bay. Even as the jokes on the screen grew louder, the guilt that had surfaced earlier in the day surged in stronger waves. I remembered every time teenage moody me had shut him out, choosing quiet anger in my bedroom over his corny jokes. I wondered how many of my present lonely evenings might have been brighter if I had let his silly stories fill the silence back then. The next morning, Mom announced she needed to stop by her classroom to feed the fish before we all headed out for errands. The idea of her doing anything other than teaching seemed wrong, even though her retirement countdown had already begun. Instinctively, I asked if I could tag along. She lit up instantly, delighted at the tiniest chance to share her world. The elementary school building was unchanged. Maroon bricks, wide maroon doors, and thick white letters above each entrance greeted us like a time warp. The hallway floors were still glossy linoleum tiles laid out in oversized squares, 2 shades of beige and a third shade used only in random bullseyes that broke the pattern every 20 feet. Those bullseyes had once felt like secret stepping stones to me, a path with rules only children understood. Mom hurried ahead, keys jangling, her comfortable shoes clicking softly. I drifted, my gaze skimmed door frames worn smooth by decades of little hands, the hooks outside every classroom still spaced at the same even heights, the same homemade signs urging respect and kindness. Even the faint scent of crayons and pencil shavings clung to the air. Down that first hallway, I recognized my own first-grade classroom. Further on, where the hall branched, I found the second-grade room whose colorful walls had sparked the beginnings of the career I now pursued. The hallway seemed to telescope, stretching farther than physics allowed, making each childhood year feel both a breath away and unreachable. My feet stopped on one of the bullseye tiles, off-white at its center with a ring of darker tan outside it. Without thinking, I hopped. Right foot squarely in the circle, left foot back to safety. Right again, left again, then both feet together whenever two bullseyes landed side by side. It was muscle memory, a silent song stuck inside my joints. Right, left, double tap. The world outside my small game faded into a dull hush, the echoes of other children's voices returning for a heartbeat. "What are you doing?" Mom called from ahead, her laugh echoing gently down the corridor. My head snapped up and I grinned, caught in the act like a thief of memories. "Playing hopscotch," I said, breathless but happy, as though the word itself explained everything. "Well, come on," she said cheerfully, shaking her head in amused fondness. "The fish are fed and the clock's ticking." She turned and marched toward the exit, continuing her running list of errands for the afternoon. I followed, but the earlier itch returned, heavier this time, coming to rest deep in my stomach. The hallway suddenly felt narrow instead of endless, and I wondered if the tightness in my throat might never tuck itself away. That night I lay on my childhood bed beneath the same aqua-blue walls my best friend and I had painted one blistering summer afternoon. The ceiling fan above me spun slow, lazy circles, the soft whir of its motor mixing with the hum of pipes inside the walls. My bed frame, repurposed from the crib Dad built back when Mom was still picking out nursery themes, creaked faintly whenever I shifted. The closet, still doorless after all Mom's promises, displayed stacks of board games and old concert t-shirts. The comforter trapped warmth close to my chin, yet a chill slid along my arms. Every part of the room felt smaller than I remembered. The shadows, once shaped like castles built for moonlight, now looked cramped, like boxes pressed too tight around everything I had been. Above me, the outline of glow-in-the-dark stars remained, though most no longer shone. I reached up, touched one, and felt the plastic's edges softened by years of gentle summer heat. Home, the word I had spoken at the door, bounced inside my head like a rubber ball thrown into a bare room, one sharp strike after another. Once it had meant this exact address, this safe space where Mom's laughter floated through doorways and Dad's quiet whistle accompanied any Saturday chore, where my brother's video game cheers spilled down the hall long past bedtime, and our old dog announced every mysterious thump the aging house made as it settled deeper into its foundation. Now I realized I no longer belonged within these walls the way I had. The life that had grown layer by layer in another town, in my own apartment with its too quiet kitchen and unpredictable radiator, was proof that I had stretched beyond this pocket of neighborhood comfort. Like a plant repotted too late, my roots ached to spread again. Childhood. The word tiptoed into my thoughts as though whispered by someone sitting beside me. My heartbeat slowed as I repeated the word silently, rolling it across the back of my tongue. Childhood felt like the right name for this house, this street, these tidy suburban corners. Childhood had grown inside my parents' traditions, watered by bedtime stories and baked pies and school science fairs. Childhood lived in the way neighbors waved whenever they crossed each other's driveways, sure they would do so for another 20 years. The ache I carried tonight was not a failure to belong so much as a longing for something impossible to revisit fully, a wish to slip through time and find the moment when this place still fit like a favorite sweater. If childhood was here, then adulthood, whatever shape it wore, now stood elsewhere. That truth settled over me as the house creaked, as Dad's shoes tapped down the hallway toward the kitchen for a midnight snack, as Mom's soft laugh floated from their room while she scrolled her phone in the dark. Somewhere down the hall, my brother's low murmur blended with the beeps of a game he played too late into the night. I shut my eyes, letting the rhythm of the house wrap around me like the faint scent of cinnamon still clinging to my pillowcase. Outside, winter wind whispered through the bare branches of the maple tree that had once been small enough for me to climb. Now it scraped gracefully against my window as if to say, "Look at me, I kept growing too." I wondered whether this mix of warmth and unease would ever fade. If, over time, my heart would accept that childhood cannot be carried indefinitely like an extra coat. Maybe the longing would settle into something gentler, like the distant smell of lilacs on the first warm afternoon of spring. Maybe home would become less a single address and more a collection of people and memories that traveled with me. I pictured future visits, bringing my own children someday, pointing out the bullseye tiles, telling them how their grandmother once chased me down the hallway after I pretended the fish needed a story instead of a feeding. Thoughts drifted farther, and I realized perhaps the itch in my chest was simply growing space, stretching wide enough to hold everything. Both this small, familiar world and the larger one still waiting outside. Eventually, the soft drone of the ceiling fan finally lulled my mind. My last waking image was of starlight dappled across the walls, blurring the sharp edges of the past into something tender and luminous. Home, childhood, whispered one final time, not vanishing or snapping shut, but taking a single gentle step back to make room for everything still to come. Oh. The sound of the door latching shut drifted into my dreams like a faint chime, far off and harmless, but it slipped through the cracks until it tugged me awake. A second later, the clack of the deadbolt followed, sharper than the first noise, and the echo of metal on metal told me someone had just left the apartment. In the half-sleep blur, I rolled over, eyes gummy, throat dry, trying to make sense of darkness and silence and cold. The blanket had twisted itself around my shoulders during the night. I felt for its edge and pulled it away, then winced at the December air sneaking through the gap in my window frame. It was the kind of chill that slid under your shirt, pressed its fingers against your ribs, and made you clench your teeth before you even opened your eyes. Still half blind with sleep, I shoved my feet over the edge of the mattress, groping the floor for slippers I knew I had kicked away in a sleepy tantrum sometime after midnight. Bare skin touched icy wood, and I yelped. The boards were colder than the inside of the fridge. I hopped once, found one slipper, shoved my foot in, then balanced on that leg while I searched for the other. "Of course," I muttered, voice hoarse. Everything, even words, felt stiff. At last, the second slipper appeared, far under the chair where yesterday's jeans lay puddled. I jammed it on, then reached for my heavy hoodie, the padded one Mom insisted on buying last winter when the utility company threatened rolling blackouts. I tugged it over my head, then stilled and listened. Silence. No Christmas carols drifting from the smart speaker in the kitchen. No clatter of pots and pans waiting on the table, Mom's usual orchestra of holiday prep. No faint strum of Dad's guitar blending with the music, those cheerful chord changes he picked up by ear so he could play along with whatever playlist Mom loved that year. Just quiet so thick it seemed to crowd every corner and hang in the air like dust caught in sunbeams. I padded into the hallway, then into the living room, expecting a burst of music, a random conversation, even the TV's welcome screen glowing in the corner. Nothing. The Christmas tree perched near the balcony doors, its colored lights blinking in slow patterns, but the sparkle felt lonely. Under its lowest branches sat 3 unopened stockings, red and fuzzy and, just yesterday, brimming with promise. The green felt gift bag that held Dad's new satin guitar strap waited on the coffee table, and the paper snowflake I had cut out as a joke for Mom hung crooked near the kitchen doorway. All of them whispered the same truth. The apartment was completely, quietly mine. I frowned. Where were Mom and Dad on Christmas morning? The thought sounded wrong, like a jigsaw puzzle piece jammed into the space where another one belonged. One of them should be here humming off-key while frying bacon. The other should be reminding me to call my cousins during the day. Yet the apartment vibrated with emptiness. Before confusion could settle into worry, my phone rattled on my nightstand. I hurried back, grabbing it so hard the charging cord snapped from the wall. MOM flashed in bright white letters. Relief let my shoulders drop. "Morning," I answered, voice still scratchy. "Good morning, Donnell," Mom said. Behind her words, I heard the muffled commotion of road noise and the unmistakable shriek of my Aunt Taisha's laughter. Mom's next words came with a laugh of her own. "Didn't you get our message, sweetheart?" Your father and I left early. Thought we'd wake you if we said goodbye in person. I must have slept through it, I said, pressing the phone to my ear and glancing at the curtains. Weak winter light seeped through the fabric. Probably around 9. Where are you guys? On the interstate, Mom replied. Your aunt's in the back seat. We're driving her up to Baltimore to spend the long weekend with Uncle Jackie. Figured we'd keep her company and stay a couple nights. In Baltimore? I rubbed my eyelashes, trying to banish the last of sleep. That's like 6 hours, right? More with traffic. Mom paused to laugh at something Taisha shouted. We left you a message. Check the family group chat. With my thumb, I swiped open the notifications. One unread message waited. Good morning, Donnell. Dad and I are taking Aunt T to Baltimore for Christmas weekend. Back in 2 days. I cooked rice and tuna. Left it on the counter if you get hungry. Take care of yourself and the house. We love you. I read it aloud in the flat tone of someone trying to catch up. When I finished, Mom chuckled in my ear. See? We didn't run off without telling you. I stared around the bedroom at the heap of hoodies on my desk chair. The strand of unlit fairy lights dangling where tape had come loose. It looked exactly like yesterday, yet the hush felt heavier than any decoration. You guys went early, I said softly. Dad's voice drifted through the line, booming and cheerful. Hey, big man, you all right? I shuffled my feet, nodded, then realized he couldn't see. Yeah, just surprised. Mom's voice returned. We worried you'd be lonely. Do you want us to send you some money for takeout? Should I text your cousin Anaya and tell her to swing by? We can get groceries delivered. It's okay, Mom, I interrupted, easing back onto the bed. The mattress let out a small sigh of springs. I've got leftovers. I'll be fine. I lifted my gaming controller from the chair, pressed the button, and watched neon blue spill across the dark room. Call me when you arrive, all right? And tell Aunt Taisha I love her. I will, sweetie. Mom's voice softened. Take care of yourself. Eat some real food. We love you. I love you too, I said, then waited for the click. The second the call ended, the flat quiet swelled again. I tapped through my games. Scrolling line after scrolling line of titles blinked past, but none hooked my attention. The screen itself felt loud, too bright, too busy. I closed the menu and opened YouTube instead, searching for chatter to fill the hours. Monty Xander's over-the-top game commentaries usually did the trick. I settled on a recent upload, leaned my head back, and let his booming jokes echo through the bedroom. On the screen, Monty shrieked at jump scares, cracked plays on words, and demanded the chat smash the like button, but the humor glided past me. Even as I laughed at the familiar jokes, a part of me was counting spaces of quiet between them. Somewhere between the video's midpoint and the third advertisement, I dozed off. The next thing I knew, my alarm rumbled against the nightstand. My fingers scrambled, knocking over an empty soda can. I blinked at the phone's glowing face. 9:03 p.m. Outside the window, the city was a dull blur of streetlights reflected off low clouds. Only then did I realize the apartment had grown colder. Somewhere in sleep, I'd allowed Mom's leftover warmth to drift away. I wrapped my robe around my shoulders and shuffled to the living room. The Christmas tree's colored bulbs still blinked. I collapsed onto the couch, staring into the lights, letting the reds and blues blur. Each gentle flash felt like the heartbeat of the house itself, slow and determined. Though the silence pressed in, the decorations kept me company. Ornaments we'd collected over 20 years deflected the blinking bulbs. The clay snowman my brother made in 3rd grade, the glass guitar Dad bought the year he decided lessons were worth the calluses, the photograph of Mom dressed as an elf at a church play in the 90s. They glimmered in brief bursts of pink and green. I sat up, gazing around at framed pictures on the walls. My kindergarten portrait wearing lopsided bunny ears on picture day. The shot of Dad squinting in sunlight on our first trip to Myrtle Beach. Mom in her cap and gown from the year she finished her master's. A strange idea bloomed. I rose, padded across the floor, lifted one photo from its nail, then another. Soon I carried half a dozen frames back to the tree and arranged them on the rug so each leaned against the trunk. In the tree's glow, those familiar faces looked almost alive, as if short on breath, waiting for me to speak. I imagined this was the Christmas we had been promising each other since my brother moved out, since Grandma sold her big house. All of us, together again, not just in pictures but in laughter, in board games spilled across the coffee table, in carols sung off-key. I sank onto the couch, tucked my knees up, and let the thought hover. Warmth pooled for a moment, a slow melt of loneliness, but it thinned too soon, sliding away like water seeping between fingers. The hush returned, louder for the space the warmth had vacated. My eyelids drooped. I let them. The vibration of my phone drilled through my dream. The jolt made me flail, and the next thing I knew, the hardwood floor thudded against my ribs. Pain fizzed through my side. The phone continued buzzing near my ear, its screen bright with incoming calls. 3 missed, all from Mom. My thumb hovered over call back, but my stomach twisted. Right. I hadn't eaten anything but half a mug of stale soda and an expired energy bar since morning. The hunger pangs sharpened, puncturing the haze of sleep. I set the phone on the couch cushion, reached my arms above my head, and stretched until my shoulders popped. Then I caught a whiff of my armpits and recoiled. Bad decision, Donnie. Food could wait 10 minutes behind a shower. Steam fogged the bathroom mirror. Hot water pounded my skin until color returned to my knuckles. Shampoo bubbles swirled down the drain like melted snow. I lingered until the water cooled, then hurried into fresh sweatpants, tossing the damp towel over my shoulders. My phone lay on the table next to the microwave now, where I'd set it while scooping Mom's tuna and rice onto a plate. 1 minute. The plate spun on the turntable, slowly flooding the kitchen with garlic pepper fragrance. I dialed Mom. The rings stretched out, echoey and distant, until the recorded voice offered a beep. I tried again. Another set of lonely rings. I pulled the plate from the microwave, set it on a potholder, and thumped the apartment's only fork against its edge while I reread her last text. Sorry, Donnie. Can't talk. Your dad and I are taking your aunts out to dinner. Hope you ate something besides game fuel. Please lock the doors. Wash dishes. Love you. Merry Christmas. Warmth fluttered inside my chest, small but steady. Even 6 hours away, Mom was still Mom, dishing instructions like extra helpings of mashed potatoes. Dad was likely bragging about my non-existent social life to Aunt Dawn right this very moment. The thought made me chuckle. I shoveled a forkful of rice into my mouth. There, beside the blinking tree, I let the hush wash over me again. It sounded less like a void this time and more like a quiet hallway stretching in front of me. New, unexplored, but mine. The first mouthful tasted better than I expected. Mom's seasoning was heavy on black pepper, light on mayo, just like I liked it when I was 10. I chewed, swallowed, and closed my eyes. The hush around me filled up with the memory of Dad's guitar, Mom singing badly, the clatter of utensils, the bark of our old dog chasing the smell of ham. None of it was truly there, but none of it was truly gone either. It was suspended, ready to unfold again the next time we stood in the same room. I finished the rice, rinsed the plate, and curled beneath the quilt on the couch. The tree lights blinked steady patterns through the night, whispering their patient promise that morning would come. My eyelids stung with exhaustion, yet my mind felt strangely light. This Christmas was not the gathering we planned, but it was a quiet place in the timeline of a family still alive, still trying, still threaded through the same belief that love could stretch 6 hours or 600 miles and remain warm. As sleep tugged me under, I felt the quilt lift slightly, as though the old dog had hopped up beside me for another of his anxious midnight watches. A grin ghosted across my lips. The hiss of the heating vent joined the prickle of tree lights on the walls, and somewhere beneath it all I heard the faintest echo of Dad's guitar chord rising up the stairs in my dreams. I whispered goodnight, half to the apartment, half to the faces in the frames, and let the hush settle soft and steady in my ears. Milton Watkins loved most evenings exactly the same way other men loved football Sundays. After supper, right at 7, he would settle into his faded corduroy recliner, click the lamp on low, balance a TV tray across his knees, and wait for the familiar horns that opened Jeopardy. He had watched for so many years that the brass and synth theme felt stitched to his skin. Even on holidays, the routine rarely changed. He would plan the ham and the dressing so the dishes were washed, the dog fed, and the kitchen lights dimmed at least 5 minutes before the contestants announced their hometowns. His wife, Velma Jean Watkins, née Mayweather, enjoyed the show just as much, though she loved it in a wilder, louder way. For Milton, the 30 minutes were gentle comfort. For Velma, they were a nightly race where she planted her heart behind whichever contestant reminded her of herself or of someone doing their best to claw upward. If a round-faced woman in a bright floral dress chimed in from Washington State, Velma rooted for her. If a middle-aged black teacher from Minneapolis strode behind the podium, Velma rooted for her even harder. And if the decision came down between a cousin of Milton's, who had actually stood on that shiny set a decade earlier, and an elderly black lady from Georgia wearing a housecoat patterned with palm leaves, she chose the lady in the palm leaves, no contest. Milton used to tease her about that. Once, years before, he had forgotten himself and said, "Really, Vel? Have you ever seen a parade float take first place?" He'd meant it as a silly jab. His cousin Dennis was skinny as a broom handle and twice as stiff. The older woman was short, round, and wore an ankle-length muumuu printed with tropical flowers. Milton's joke compared her to a float drifting down Main Street, but the humor had dropped like an anvil between them. Velma shot him a glare sharp enough to cut wire. "Really, Milt? You gonna diss my sister like that? Your cousin ain't nothing but a broke-down loser, just like his cousin." She emphasized those last 3 words by tapping an angry finger on his knee. Milton let the insult slide. Velma's words stung. He had never thought of himself as a loser, yet he sensed the hidden tremor in her voice, that hot river of defense that always flowed for people she thought the world dismissed. That had been 8 long years ago, a whole season of shows back when both of them were a little younger, a little steadier on their feet, and a little less frayed by life. Lately, Velma's edges pricked sharper than the catfish bones she fried on Saturday nights. But on this particular Friday just before Christmas, Milton still hoped the ritual would glide smoothly. Shortly before 7, he called down the hallway. "Come on, Han. Show's about to start." He drew the words out so she could hear the warmth beneath the impatience. He didn't want her to miss the contestant introductions. She loved the introductions, loved the little 5-second biographies Alex Trebek, God rest him, or now Ken Jennings read off blue cards. She needed to know who had 3 rescue beagles or who taught organic chemistry on the Navajo reservation. That information mattered. A good backstory meant Velma would clap and point and say, "That one, Milton. That one's got my vote." He listened for her answer. Nothing but the click of a stove knob and the faint hiss of butter hitting a skillet. He stood, joints popping, and shuffled toward the kitchen archway. "Vel, at the stove," came the reply, and a moment later Velma hustled into the living room. She wore one of her quilt-bright kaftans, geometric shapes in red, teal, mustard, and copper that floated behind her like banners. Her hair, once coal-black, had been threaded with gray until the overall effect showed more silver than night. She still braided it every morning and piled the braids high, then pinned a plastic comb through the crown so the shape resembled a small city skyline. Milton thought she looked dramatic and proud all at once, something between an African queen and a Florida art festival sculptor. She set Milton's supper on his tray, placed her own plate on the matching stand beside her rocker, and then lowered herself into the cushion with a sigh that sounded half like relief, half like warning. "That was close, Milt. Don't let the chicken burn next time. I swear, if I had to miss the local news jingle again." Milton swallowed any answer that might bring sparks. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and picked up his fork. Velma hit the remote exactly as the theme began. She sang along, da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. The notes were half humming, half chanting, entirely Velma. Tonight's panel featured a brisk 30-something in a charcoal suit and crisp side-parted hair, a soft-spoken librarian from Oregon in a hand-knitted shawl, and a 40-something black woman wearing a glittery Christmas tree brooch and a green head wrap. Velma settled on the woman before any clues flashed on the board. Milton guessed correctly that Velma would. He bent to his chicken, grateful she'd arrived on time. When the librarian stumbled early on a Shakespeare category, Velma let out a disappointed hiss. "Now, baby girl, you gotta read more than card catalog labels," she scolded the screen, then brightened when her champion answered a tricky world capitals clue. The round ended with the head-wrapped contestant in second place and the sharp-dressed man. He wore a two-type blazer, a floral tie, and a tidy man bun way ahead. "He's good," Milton admitted as the credits rolled. "Could make tournament." Velma scoffed. "Hard. Boy, hush. Go on admiring that peacock if it lifts your skirts." Milton winced, not because the words stung, but because he recognized the rhythm. Sarcasm thawing into derision. She'd been edgy since morning, and jeopardy often spiked her moods high or low. He slid out of his chair, carried his empty plate to the sink, and retreated to the back porch. Peace waited there, smelling of mud and flowering weeds and the brackish lagoon that lapped against the property line. Outside, the screen door humidity wrapped him in a damp hug. The swamp sang its nightly opera. Tree frogs trilled bright notes, crickets provided a rattling tremolo, and somewhere close a pair of bull gators exchanged deep barrel-chest bellows. Milton inhaled deeply until his lungs felt coated with warm silk. This was his sanctuary, the same weathered wooden porch built by his grandfather before paved roads reached this part of Escambia County. The porch faced a narrow creek feeding the larger marsh. Dock lights across the water threw thin bars of gold onto ripples, and Spanish moss swayed from the cypress branches like gray lace scarves. When he was younger, Milton had begged his father never to sell. He promised to keep the old house sound, the porch screened, and the little dock free of barnacles. He had kept that promise, even after his father was gone and his mother moved in with her sister inland. The swirl of insects, the cushion of starglow, and the low whoosh of wind weaving through tall reeds softened the tension in his shoulders. Velma's sharp edge cooled with distance, the way hot syrup thickens when left on the porch rail. He understood her anger better than most would. He had watched it grow from seedlings planted long before they met. The stories she told were sketches, dark, vague, but enough for him to picture the outlines. Her uncle's drunken tirades after her parents vanished on a so-called grand adventure. Her Aunt Daisy's sickbed, the nightly horrors Velma endured behind closed doors. Milton never pressed for more than what she offered. The fragments alone were weighty enough to bend a person's spine. He leaned against the porch railing and let his mind wander farther into the past. He remembered the first time Velma brought up her childhood without flinching. They had been married less than 3 years. A thunderstorm kept them awake, and the power cut out. Candles flickered in the kitchen. Rain clattered on the metal roof, and Velma suddenly confessed she did not trust men who spoke softly but carried heavy Bibles. Milton had known immediately what she meant. He felt no need to pry. He took her hand and nodded. That kindness, he believed, had bridged them then. But the years had a way of fraying goodwill. Too much silence became its own kind of neglect. Velma's childhood shadows never filled with sunlight. They simply crouched behind doors until they grew restless again. In his quietness, Milton sometimes wondered if he had traded active support for avoiding conflict. He pushed the thought aside and admired the night until his pulse slowed. Then a small, questioning sound drifted from the underside of the porch steps. Mew! Milton tilted his head. He hadn't seen a cat out here in years. Feral ones rarely survived near the creek. Gators didn't discriminate between fish and feline, but that mew was clear as any kitten's cry. He flipped the porch light switch. Warm yellow illuminated the slatted boards, the tidy milkweed patch Velma had planted for butterflies, and the sun-bleached concrete blocks that braced the steps. 2 glowing dots, eyes reflecting light, hovered beneath the milkweed leaves. Kitty! Milton crouched slowly, knees protesting. Here, puss puss. Kitty, kitty, kitty. The eyes blinked, reappeared inches closer. A shadowy shape slunk into the open. It was small, midnight black, no bigger than a loaf of bread. The kitten paused, ears swiveling, then let out another plaintive mew. Milton's heart warmed. Well, look at you. He extended a hand but kept still. The kitten retreated beneath the greenery. A moment later, dry leaves rustled, then silence, gone. He sighed. Poor thing. Lost or abandoned before winter really bit. He switched off the light. Inside, Velma was washing plates. From the doorway, Milton watched her shoulders tight with frustration. He chose not to mention the cat. Tomorrow he would set a saucer of cream on the porch and see if the stranger returned. Morning arrived bright and sticky. Winter in North Florida was more suggestion than season. Milton stepped outside and placed a shallow dish of half and half on the bricks beside the milkweed. When he returned that afternoon, the bowl was empty. A possum or raccoon might have found it, yet Milton sensed it had been the kitten. Raccoons left muddy footprints, possums tipped dishes. The bowl sat exactly as he had set it. Velma did not notice the offering until dusk. She leaned out the screen door, hair clips catching golden light. "What you doing with my good cream, Milton?" "Just felt like a treat," he said, cheeks warm. "A treat for what?" "You and me trying to cut cholesterol, remember?" She tooted and let the screen door slam. "Waste of money." He did not protest. Instead, he set another saucer out after sundown. That evening's Jeopardy returned the sharp-dressed champion. No black women appeared. Velma instead chose a 55-year-old software tester from New Delhi who wore thick glasses, a royal blue sweater, and a shy smile. She liked the way he rolled his R's. He did well, very well, but not well enough to topple the man-bun juggernaut. As final scores flashed, Velma cursed softly and pushed her tray aside. "Rigged," she muttered. Fancy pants producers probably fed him the categories backstage. Her mood unraveled from there, all spikes and bitter syllables. Milton dared no rebuttal. He excused himself and stepped onto the porch with a Coors. The kitten waited at the milkweed patch, eyes shining like gold coins in moonlight. Milton spoke low, crooning nonsense words. This time he carried leftover fried catfish in his shirt pocket. He tossed one bite near the saucer and knelt, still as a statue. The kitten crept forward, sniffed, then devoured each morsel as if unsure more existed. When the food was gone, Milton dared extend a finger. The kitten bumped it with her nose, then allowed him to stroke the sleek head. Her purr rumbled tiny and fierce. "What's your name, little girl?" he asked. The kitten answered only by pushing deeper into his palm, claiming kindness. Milton scooped her gently, nestling her against his chest where the night air couldn't nip her bones. The moment felt like fragile magic. One sharp sound might shatter it. He carried her to the porch swing and sat rocking, letting her fine claws knead his shirt. Velma's voice pierced the hush. "Milton, you damned fool. Quit feeding that cat our food." Startled, the kitten leapt from his lap and disappeared beneath the milkweed. Velma stood at the doorway, arms crossed, face a thundercloud. "You want to fatten up gator snacks? That's your business." She huffed and slammed the door. When Milton looked back at the patch, the glowing eyes were gone. Morning brought more cream to the saucer, more catfish scraps, and more careful coaxing. In daylight, the kitten appeared a bit older than Milton first assumed. Still slim, but steady on its paws, coat glossy, eyes bright chartreuse. No collar, probably born feral, though she trusted him quicker than a true marsh stray. He scratched behind her ear. "You're a survivor, huh?" He felt a pulse of respect. Swamp kittens either learned fast or vanished. This one wore no scratches, no ticks, no fear. He decided to call her Stephanie, a gentle name that felt strong, steady. Velma, hearing it, snorted. More like gator poop. That's what she'll be in a week. But she did not order Milton to stop feeding the kitten. Over the next few days, the ritual cemented. Milton would set out milk or leftovers and talk softly. Stephanie appeared from the weeds, ate, and allowed a few minutes of cuddling before darting back into the dark. Velma bristled less each evening, though she still rolled her eyes whenever she noticed the saucer. Then came Monday, mid-season reruns for Jeopardy, so Milton offered to watch an old Bing Crosby comedy instead. Velma agreed, surprising him. She even laughed. Really laughed at the silly misunderstandings and outdated dance numbers. Milton watched her more than the movie, noticing how laughter smoothed her forehead and softened the edges of her mouth. Toward the end, Stephanie ventured inside through the open screen door and curled at Velma's feet. Velma glanced down, eyebrows rising. Instead of shooing the kitten, she reached to scratch the silky head. Stephanie purred loud as a power saw. Milton's heart thumped. The next morning, Velma fried fresh chicken, mashed potatoes, and creamy gravy, her competition night special. "Can't have stale food on a night a black woman's gonna claim victory," she declared, though she did not yet know who would appear. She placed Milton's plate on his tray and then, without a word, set a small saucer of milk and a separate plate of shredded meat on the floor between their armchairs. Milton hid a smile behind his iced tea. He didn't remark that whole milk cost more than half and half. He simply nodded his thanks. That night's Jeopardy began with a white woman from Ohio, an awkward high school math teacher from Tennessee, and a black astrophysics professor named Dr. Nova Cunningham. Velma's face lit brighter than the Christmas tree. "That one?" she whispered fiercely, finger stabbing the air. "She's ours." From the opening bell, Velma answered along with Dr. Cunningham: state capitals, Shakespeare quotations, world rivers, suffragette history. Each correct response made Stephanie's purr rumble louder against Velma's leg until the whole recliner seemed to buzz. Milton sat astonished. Velma had always been sharp, but tonight she blazed. Double Jeopardy ended with the professor modestly ahead and the Tennessee teacher a close second. Final Jeopardy category: American poetry. Velma's grin risked splitting her cheeks. When the clue revealed a line from Phyllis Wheatley, Velma scribbled on her mental chalkboard and slapped her knee. "Who is Phyllis Wheatley Milton? Who is Wheatley?" All three contestants answered correctly, but Velma knew before the numbers tallied that Dr. Cunningham had wagered just enough to win by a nose. Velma yelped, leaping halfway from her seat. Stephanie bolted, knocked her saucer sideways, then rushed back to rub Velma's ankles as though sharing the victory. Milton grinned. Velma turned to him, eyes shining. Instead of a scolding or a jab, she said, "Did you hear me, Milt? I got them all, even the daily doubles." Her voice trembled between pride and disbelief. Milton reached across the armrest and squeezed her hand. "You did, Han. You crushed it." Outside, night pressed its cool forehead to the windows, but inside the living room heat blossomed. Something gentler, fuller than the gas furnace could provide. Milton thought of Stephanie slinking near the milkweed months from now, larger, heavier, maybe still wild but drawn to an open door where lonely people sat waiting to cheer a stranger on TV. He thought of Velma's world-weary anger softening because a kitten's beating heart dared to trust her lap. He thought of himself, of silence, and of how many words he might still learn to say. He embraced Velma when the credits rolled, and this time she leaned into him, head on his shoulder. Somewhere in the dark, the swamp toads belched their night songs. Their voices were deep but oddly comforting, like the bass drum that holds a blues band steady. Velma whispered, almost embarrassed, "Maybe tomorrow I'll grill some fish for Stephanie Gator Poop." Milton chuckled into her hair. "Maybe tomorrow, Han, you and I'll grill enough for the three of us." And outside, in the shadowy hush where Spanish moss swayed like sleepy ghosts, the little black cat blinked golden eyes and waited for morning, knowing that milk would come again and, with it, the miraculous hush that sometimes grows where love is finally spoken out loud. Oh. I woke up in a dream that felt so real I first believed it was morning for true. In that moment, I thought I had only dozed off at the cafe down the street, because everything around me seemed ordinary enough. Straight-back wooden chairs, a scattering of people sipping coffee, large windows looking out on a gentle boulevard where cars rolled by at a slow, almost lazy pace. The air carried the faint scent of roasted beans and warm milk. Outside, a few leaves blew along the pavement, the kind that swirl and settle, hypnotic in their rhythm. At the table across from mine sat my father, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on me in fury so raw it almost felt like heat on my face. This shock of seeing him made me blink twice, as if my eyelids might work as shutters to snap everything out of focus and back again. The cafe chatter seemed to die in an instant, replaced by the awful knowledge that I was alone with a man who considered me an enemy. His anger filled the small space between us, thick and suffocating, pressing against my chest until breathing felt heavy. Even without a sound, I sensed a storm inside him. A storm that would break open at any moment, pouring blame and shame upon me as it always did. He held a phone in his hand. My phone, I realized quickly, though I could not remember handing it to him. Fingers tight around the device, he scrolled with a vengeance, and I knew what he had found even before he spoke the first word. Luca's name flashed again and again on the screen. Every text, every call lay exposed. Each line was something I had once tapped with thumb and hope in the privacy of night, believing I could tuck it away afterward. The illusion of privacy shattered under my father's glare. He read aloud in a hard, jagged voice that cut deeper with every word. "You said this? And that?" He repeated my sentences as if they were crimes, each phrase a stone thrown straight at my heart. My mouth opened, but no words escaped. I wanted to ask how he had unlocked my phone, but deeper than that, I wanted to plead for understanding, to make him see that Luca was not the villain he imagined. Yet my throat felt clamped shut. There was no air for explaining. His anger rose so quickly it blistered. Without warning, he shouted, "You should die!" In a single, terrible moment, I saw the full width of his hatred, broader than the boulevard outside, stronger than any trust we once shared. The rage twisted his mouth, curved his fingers, pulled him forward across the table like a predator, and for the first time I believed he might mean it. He might truly want me gone. I felt stripped bare, mind scrambling for an exit or even a reason, but reason had no place in this rushing flood. The cafe faded around us. I was suddenly standing outside, the sky gray and low, as if the clouds had pressed close to the roofs. A bitter wind sliced between buildings, carrying the chill of midwinter down the sleepy street. We began walking downhill, and I noticed the slope led toward a small row of kiosks that remained open despite the cold. Two men stood leaning on a painted wooden stall, their breath visible in white plumes. One waved a bottle in his hand, and both swayed on unsteady feet. My father's shouting spilled across the quiet boulevard like shattered glass. He hurled insults at me with rising volume, not caring who listened. The alcohol-tainted men laughed and mimicked him, but they mocked him more than they mocked me, tossing back his words in silly tones. For a heartbeat, I pictured myself asking them for help, but I knew no stranger would face my father when fury fueled him. Their lazy jokes served only as echoes, small sparks of cruelty that made everything worse. We reached a snow-covered park, silent and almost peaceful if not for the yelling. The wind had dropped, and every sound felt magnified. Frozen breath, grinding boots, harsh voice. A playground lay at the foot of a hill, its metal bars dusted white, slides glazed in ice. The swings hung motionless, chains creaking whenever the wind stirred ever so slightly. My father advanced, his boots crunching in fresh snow. His words grew sharper. I was a failure, an embarrassment, an unwanted waste of fate's good chance. He claimed everything about me was wrong. How I spoke, how I loved, how I dreamed. Each word struck freshly because each word reminded me of arguments long buried but never forgotten. My stomach tightened until I thought it might split open. I needed distance. Without a plan, I climbed the snowy hill. Cold air bit my cheeks, but climbing kept my muscles warm. Behind me, he struggled upward as well, slower but relentless, like a heavy machine churning steadily. Years ago, he could have overtaken me with ease, but age and weight slowed him. Still, his determination closed the gap. My mother appeared far below, a small figure at the playground edge. Her red scarf contrasted with the pale world. She watched but did not rush to stop him. Maybe she believed he would calm down once he reached me. Maybe she felt stuck between fear of him and love for me. Either way, her silence cut just as deep as his words. I tried to forget her watching eyes and kept climbing, snow crunching, heart thudding, each step a protest. Leave me, leave me, leave me. He seized my ankle. Reflex took over. I lashed out with my boot, felt his grip slip, and heard a muffled shout as he tumbled backward. He slid down the slope, rolling once, twice, before coming to rest in a heap. My pulse raced. For a stunned second, I wondered if he'd broken a bone or damaged his spine. A shock rose in my chest. Fear, maybe, or a broken piece of sympathy. But then I recognized a familiar tension in his body. He was pretending. He had done something similar before, falling in a rage, lying still, then jumping up to accuse me of purposefully harming him. The memory erased the sympathy and replaced it with weary fury. Sure enough, he rose, brushed snow from his coat, and roared my name with renewed hatred. He scrambled upward again, slower than before, but no less determined. I kept stepping higher, boots sinking into frosty crust. At the top, the snow was deeper, untouched by other feet. The air felt thinner, colder. I could see the boulevard and the cafe tables down the gentle curve of the street, could see the motionless swings and my mother's tiny form. My father shouted to the people below. Those same men, my mother, anyone else who might appear, begging them to hold me, to punish me, claiming I deserved nothing short of death. But the men only laughed, not so much at me as at the absurdity of his demand. No one moved to aid him. His voice cracked in the chilly air, an animal cry. Snowflakes fluttered from a slate sky, landing on my eyelashes. Everything slowed into a harsh hush. I understood a strange truth. At this moment, only he and I existed. We were locked in a private war and nobody else would intervene. He reached for me once more. Exhaustion hardened my muscles into stone. I pushed him harder than before. Not a gentle shove, but a full, desperate thrust with both hands. His feet slid out beneath him. His arms pinwheeled, clutched at air, and then he fell sideways. The snow swallowed him past his hips, past his chest, until only his head remained above the surface, like a grotesque flower blooming in white soil. He thrashed, but the more he moved, the deeper he sank, soft snow shifting under his weight, refusing to support him. A thought flickered through me. What if I let him sink completely? What if I pressed him down and ended this chase forever? The idea frightened me, thrilled me, felt both wrong and inevitable, like seeing a forbidden word in a holy book. He choked on snow, sputtered, cursed. His arms flailed toward me, but I stood just beyond reach, breathing hard, feeling the steady thump of blood behind my ears. No part of me moved to save him. Another breath, another heartbeat. My boots shifted closer. I planted my hands on his shoulders and pushed down. The snow gave way again. His face vanished. The world turned quiet as a held breath. I stepped back, but even so I expected him to explode upward, coughing, raging, rising like a monster in an old horror film. Instead, silence deepened. Snow settled over the place where he had been. A gust blew loose flakes across the hillside, smoothing footprints into vague impressions. The playground seemed entirely empty for a heartbeat longer, save for my mother, whose form blurred at the bottom of the slope. I could not tell if she saw anything or if she understood what happened. I only knew I had no strength left to climb or think, so I slid down the easiest side of the hill. My legs shook. The world blurred with unshed tears and unbearable relief. Halfway down, I forced my feet into a controlled slide, knees bent, snow spraying into my sleeves. When I reached level ground, I walked through churned powder toward the playground exit. My boots left diagonal tracks, crossing the open space like a scar. I did not look back. 10 minutes? 20? Time stretched. I found myself returning to the playground, as if an invisible string pulled me. The sky had darkened further. My mother stood near the swings, arms folded against the cold. She gazed at me with puzzled calm. No panic, no anger, just quiet expectation. "Where is he?" she asked. Her voice sounded mild, almost bored, as though she'd asked where the remote control was hiding. I shrugged, said nothing. The cold air made my reply feel brittle, like chalk scraped on ice. She nodded once, perhaps accepting ignorance, perhaps resigned to it. Behind her, the hill looked smooth, pristine, undisturbed but for wind trails across the surface. Then I saw him, or what looked like him, beneath the metal structure housing a slide. A small figure circled, legs crooked at odd angles, as though each step required painful effort. He wore a dirty coat far too large for his shoulders. Hair, shoulder length, thin, greasy, hung over his eyes. A shiver crawled up my spine. I stepped closer, hiding behind the side of the structure, half curious, half terrified. The boy, or man, lurched into view under the dull lamp hanging near the slide. His gait reminded me of an injured animal. When he tilted his head, light fell over his face. His upper lip split in the middle, bearing teeth in an uneven line. The pink flesh looked raw, freshly broken. Scars spidered out from the corners of his mouth. In that instant, recognition slammed my chest. Somehow, impossible as it seemed, this was my father, or a fragment of him, reduced to half size, sealed inside a twisted shell, robbed of rage, robbed of memory. He glanced my way but showed no spark of recognition. His eyes carried nothing. No anger, no blame, only the blank confusion of someone lost inside their own body. How could a man who had roared like a wildfire mere minutes ago stand before me, shrunken to the ghost of a 14-year-old? A sound escaped my throat, nothing like speech. My mother's eyes filled with tears, as though she saw the scene through some hidden lens. She placed a hand on my sleeve but did not squeeze or pull. We watched him drift beyond the edge of the playground and disappear behind a row of bare bushes. Snowflakes gathered on his shoulders, turning him into a moving statue until he vanished from view. The hush returned and I tasted iron on my tongue, not sure if it was fear or the cold biting my lips. The dream changed, dissolved, reformed. I floated inside a different scene. An empty room with gray walls, bare floorboards. A low hum filled the air, like distant machinery. 5 boys stood in a loose semicircle, all teenagers, but one clearly different. The deformed boy, my father's new shape, wobbled behind them, shoulders hunched. A man in teacher's clothing addressed me and the other boys. He spoke clinically, explaining, "The boy you see is not a child, but a fully grown adult whose body failed him. A man living in a frame that never matured." The teacher's words felt cold, medical. He said the deformity bowed the boy's bones and twisted his joints, locking him in permanent pain. He said the boy's silence came not from shyness but from vocal cords damaged by early illness. I wanted to ask Ben, the teacher's name on his badge, whether cruelty caused the boy's twisted limbs, whether rage calcified into bone and muscle, but my voice failed. The other boys stared with blank or pitying eyes. Then the teacher beckoned us to leave, to go through a doorway covered with heavy black fabric that fluttered in a wind I could not feel. The group shuffled forward. The deformed boy lagged, hair obscuring his damaged mouth, until the teacher guided him gently by the shoulder. I felt an intense pull to help, but my feet refused to move. A chill slid up my spine. The scene darkened. Everything melted away. I woke abruptly, heart hammering like a trapped bird. Sweat glued my shirt to my back. The room smelled faintly of stale air and damp cotton. Streetlights leaked through blinds, painting pale bars across my ceiling. For several seconds I lay still, letting reality settle. My father had not turned into a child. He was miles away, maybe yelling at someone else, maybe sitting quietly alone. He was unstable, yes, but not a snow-buried corpse or a twisted teen wandering a playground. My mind repeated, "It was only a dream, but the words felt thin as tissue. Every image clung fiercely, refusing to fade. I had not seen him in 2 weeks. Last time we met, he raised his voice as usual, yet left without slamming the door. He had changed, less fury, more brittle complaints. Maybe age chipped away his strength, maybe medication, but the dream suggested something deeper, more frightening. A vision in which my father's cruelty collapsed under its own weight, leaving behind a broken child who no longer remembered why he was angry. Was that bizarre transformation a wish? A fear? The line between hope and dread blurred. Part of me wanted that rage to fade, leaving him powerless. Part of me pitied the lost figure in my dream. Paranoia crept in. What if the dream hinted at today? What if a final confrontation loomed, fated by these nightmares? But logic insisted. Dreams mirror feelings and fears, not events. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. Inhale slowly through the nose, hold, exhale through the mouth. My therapist had taught me that last year. It helped ground the spiraling thoughts. I sat up, swung my legs over the edge of the bed, felt the carpet's rough fibers under my toes. I was safe. Snow lay outside, yes, but it was fresh and untouched and nobody hunted me. The phone rested on my nightstand, face dark. No missed calls from my father. No evidence he had hacked my messages. My privacy still lived behind passwords and encryption. The dream could not steal it. I repeated the breaths until the trembling lessened. Still, sleep felt impossible now. I rose, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and shuffled to the kitchen. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I poured water and leaned against the counter. Outside, streetlights illuminated falling snow, crystalline, beautiful. Somewhere in the darkness stood families warm in their homes, couples chatting quietly, children dreaming of sledding. For me, the hush held both peace and loneliness. I realized I could stay here all day, safe from my father's anger, yet a fragment of love still yearned for something kinder. Some part of me hoped he might call with an apology. Unlikely, but hope is stubborn. Another part whispered I should block his number forever. The dream had cracked something open. It forced me to confront a buried wish, that he disappear, or at least shrink until his anger no longer towered. Yet the dream also showed that even if he shrank, I would feel no triumph, only emptiness. That meant something. I could not rely on his change to find my peace. Peace had to come from drawing lines, not burying him. I set the glass down, returned to my room, grabbed a notebook. Under the dim bedside lamp, I wrote every detail of the dream, from the cafe's roasted smell to the teacher's clinical tone. As I wrote, the images loosened. They became stories on paper, not chains around my mind. When dawn finally pinked the blinds, I felt lighter. I closed the notebook and whispered to myself that today would be normal. Work, lunch, maybe a call to Luca, no snow hills or burying bodies. My father remained unpredictable, but the dream belonged to me alone, and I could choose what meaning I carried forward. Not the fear of being pursued, but the knowledge that other people's rage need not govern my steps. I could turn and walk away, down the hill, across the playground, out of reach. Whether he flailed forever in his own snowdrift was his burden, not mine. Oh. Some summer evenings felt as though the entire earth was holding its breath. The sky deepened from late-day blue to indigo to a velvet darkness so rich it seemed to soak up every sound. Crickets tuned their tiny violins, cicadas sawed their raspy cellos, and somewhere close to the creek a single bullfrog kept time with a slow, deliberate bass note that echoed inside my chest. On those evenings, my grandfather and I shared a secret language made of small gestures. While everyone else gathered around the kitchen table to finish dessert or clear dishes, he would glance my way, one eyebrow lifting, one eye closing in a conspiratorial wink. That was my summons. No one else noticed. Grandma might have suspected. Grandmothers see most things, but she never said a word. I would slip from my chair, fold the navy blanket that lived on the back of the sofa, and hug it to my chest. Even on the muggiest nights, the blanket's dusty earth smell comforted me. It smelled of cool attics, forgotten cedar chests, and the first warm gust that rises from garden soil when a spade breaks the crust in spring. Grandfather moved silently for a man whose knees groaned when he stood. He opened the back door without letting the screen bang and led me past the lilac hedge that bordered our small yard. During daylight, that hedge looked friendly. Fat green leaves, knots of purple bloom buzzing with bees. After sunset, it loomed like a living wall, each shadowed branch guarding our escape from porchlight reality into fields where moths ruled the air. The hedge blocked any view from kitchen windows, so the moment we crossed its threshold, we disappeared into our own world. Beyond the lilacs, the lawn changed to rough grass, wild and sweet with clover. Grandfather aimed toward the only rise in a county otherwise flat as a griddle. We simply called it the hill, no other description needed. I was small enough that summer grass brushed my elbows, each stalk leaving dewdrops on bare skin. Grasshoppers ricocheted away, landing 2 or 3 blades over, then tapped a rhythm with their wings that blended into cricket music. Whenever I lost my footing, Grandfather slowed a fraction, giving me just enough time to catch up without making it obvious he had noticed. We passed the creek, where a willow trailed fingers across the surface. In daylight, those green fingers shimmered. At night, they surrendered to blackness, so the willow looked like a dark waterfall frozen mid-cascade. We passed a stand of sycamores rising in silent congregation. Grandfather once told me those trees remembered the Civil War soldiers who camped beneath their canopy. Whether the memory belonged to the trees or to my grandfather's imagination, I never argued. I simply nodded, the way one nods at children who swear they see fairies in foxglove bells. Memory and imagination often share the same route. The hill greeted us with its familiar slope. Each step upward lifted the horizon until, near the top, we could almost taste wind drifting from every direction. When we reached the crest, Grandfather spread the navy blanket and settled onto it with a careful exhale. I flopped beside him, arms flung wide. Tall grass framed our small dark island and muffled every distant sound. Passing cars, doors closing, television laughter leaking from nearby houses. We lay shoulder to shoulder, pinkies touching, eyes skyward. Stars appeared individually at first, like timid children peeking around curtains, then in clusters, until the whole arc above glittered more silver than black. We fell into a comfortable hush. Grandfather believed a story needed space to grow. He always waited until the landscape itself hushed before his voice entered. Eventually, he inhaled long and slow. I recognized the breath, his cue that our evening story was ready to leave his lungs. In a low baritone roughened by decades of sawdust and pipe smoke, he began. Once, when bullfrogs sang louder than the cicadas and street lamps had not yet stolen the stars, he said, I walked alone on the moonlit beach you know so well. The waves, gentle as sleeping cats, rolled to my feet and back again. The wet sand gleamed like glass. Far across the water, the horizon glowed pale where the sky tugged at the ocean. His words settled over my imagination like fresh paint. I pictured that shoreline, really our family's favorite public beach 2 hours east. Except within his tale, the sand looked larger, the wind smelled raw, and every wave seemed alive. It was the same place and not the same, a reality expanded by storytelling. He continued, moonlight made every rock throw a shadow darker than coal dust. Looking ahead, I saw a woman bent over near the breakers. Her white dress shone brighter than any seashell. She had bare feet, and her hair was so dark I could barely separate it from shadow. As she straightened, I thought I saw wings. Thin, transparent as ice on a pond, tinted colors no painter could mix. I blinked, and the wings vanished, leaving only a lonely woman who looked young as a newly opened blossom yet old as tide pools. Grandfather's voice held me steady, but my mind floated up to the stars. I let the black vault above transform. Constellations rearranged themselves into a winged figure. Bright Arcturus became the moonlit hem of her dress. Vega formed the first glint of a silver chain. The night around me pulsed with possibility. She was crying, Grandfather said. I heard it before I saw her tears, soft hiccups hidden inside the surf's hush. In all my years, I'd learned one rule that never fails. When you meet a fairy shedding tears, you must stop and help. Their sorrow weighs more than stone, and their gratitude shines brighter than sunlight. So I asked, why do you weep, fairy? I chose the word deliberately. Calling her a woman might have offended her magic. Calling her a girl would insult her ancient grace. He paused long enough that cicadas filled the gap, their drone rising like heat from asphalt. I imagined the fairy turning, eyes luminous, sea breeze tugging strands of hair across her cheeks. She said, I have lost my necklace, an irreplaceable gift. The waves wish to keep it. They adore all that glitters. The sea, you see, is greedier than any dragon breathing gold. I asked her what treasure we hunted, and she described a silver chain fine as spider silk, carrying a crescent moon no larger than my thumbnail and a crystal smaller than a tear. Such a thing could hide beneath any ripple. Yet hope often finds what reason deems impossible. So I knelt beside her and dragged my fingers through cold water. We searched one tide pool circle, certain it dropped there. We found rainbow-lined clamshells, sea-worn glass smoother than marbles, and driftwood bleached like bones, but no necklace. Moonlight wavered behind clouds. Her shoulders slumped. I feared her sadness might drown dolphins thousands of miles away if it grew heavier. So I offered her my name. Yes, your grandpa had another name before he earned the title, you know? And told her, Melody, for that was her name. Go rest. Stars fade. Tomorrow they'll return, and with them hope will sparkle anew. I thought she might shrink small enough to perch on my palm, tuck beneath a morning glory trumpet. Instead she smiled, as thin as crescent moon itself, and thanked me. Then she walked into darkness toward dunes. Alone again, I listened to waves swallow her footprints. The following night returned wearing sleet gray clouds. No ferry greeted me. I dug beneath wet sand with toes and fingertips until my numb skin found nothing but rock. Yet I stayed, as promises deserve repeated tries. Still no glimmer of silver. Day 3 arrived, trailing sun showers and humidity thick enough to ring. I trudged barefoot along foam edges, ready to abandon the quest, when the moon wedged itself between clouds just long enough to cast one spotlight onto shallow surf. There a spark winked. I lunged, closed my fist around water and sand. Certain disappointment waited. Yet when I opened my palm, the silver chain lay across my skin exactly as Melody described. I shouted as loudly as a man may who fears breaking magic. Clouds drifted aside. Moonlight poured down and revealed Melody stepping toward me, her dress bright, her hair alive with wind. I offered the necklace. She looped it around her throat, and though she smiled gently, something powerful lit her face. Joy like sunrise after a month of rain. She thanked me, but words felt small. So she slid the little moon pendant into her cupped hand, breathed on it, and whispered. The pendant glowed. She pressed it against my heart. In that moment, every scene of my life unfolded in reverse and forward simultaneously. My childhood falls, my mother's lullabies, every salmon leaping upstream, every star born from dust. Then the world snapped back. She withdrew her hand. Carry kindness as easily as you carried my sorrow, she told me. I nodded. She vanished. And that, little one, is how I met your grandmother. Grandfather ended the story the same place he always did, letting silence resume its reign. My chest felt both heavy and light. The story anchored me to ancient tides, yet lifted me on wings I almost believed I could see. I studied the sky, picking out the tiny silver pendant among constellations, picturing Melody's necklace hung across Orion's belt or floating just above the waxing moon. We lay silent until my limbs tingled from stillness. Often I drifted half asleep, counting falling stars. Grandfather never nudged me when my eyelids dipped. He only traced patterns in the sky with a calloused finger, pointing out satellites or maybe the line where Pegasus galloped. Eventually he'd tap my shoulder. We'd fold the blanket, shake blades of grass loose, and shuffle home. Years passed. I remained faithful to our ritual through childhood, but as adolescence arrived, so did obligations. Homework, soccer practice, part-time jobs. I began answering grandfather's after-dinner wink with apologetic shrugs. Tomorrow, Grandpa, I'd say, but tomorrow often arrived with new excuses. He never scolded. He merely nodded and sipped coffee, eyes holding the wistful acceptance of men who know clocks outrun desire. College carried me hundreds of miles away. Summers filled with internships and friendships of convenience. Grandfather's letters, ink careful, sentences wandering like creek water, piled unread until guilt forced me to scan them. He hinted at new stories waiting beneath fresh constellations neither of us recognized anymore because city lights bleached them. Still, I rarely returned. Time carved deeper valleys beside his nose, stiffer hinges in his fingers. Knees that once guided him effortlessly up the hill began complaining if he fetched mail. When I finally drove home for a week, I found him dozing in a sunspot, caned by his chair. We made small talk of weather and my job. He never mentioned the blanket, the hedge, or the hill, but after supper he poured coffee, turned in his seat, and winked. The gesture jolted every abandoned summer back into focus. Shame and love collided in my throat. I stood so quickly my chair scraped tile. I fetched the blanket, faded to storm cloud gray, and shook it gently. Dust motes danced. Grandpa chuckled. "It remembers," he said. That night, for the first time in close to 15 years, I led. I guided him past the hedge, now trimmed for safety, along a path newly mown by neighborhood volunteers who treated the old man's backyard like public heritage. We climbed the hill slowly. I spread the blanket. He lowered himself with a sigh that mixed pain and pleasure. I slid a small pillow behind his head. Only then did I realize the cicadas had paused, as though resetting for an encore. Their concert resumed quieter, perhaps out of respect for his diminished hearing. From habit, I waited for grandfather to speak. Minutes ticked. His breathing stayed even. Maybe he nodded off, I thought. Then a cricket scraped a loud chord and something inside me unfurled. An ancient scroll waiting decades for unrolling. I drew a breath long and steady, echoing the one he used when I was little. Once, I began, voice trembling. When grass brushed my fingertips and the world hummed like a hive, a young magician met a moon fairy. In the telling, I borrowed pieces of his story. The lonely beach, the lost necklace, but layered threads of my own, describing how a magician's palms glowed blue when he chanted in music scale, how the fairy's wings sometimes stuttered like candle flame in wind. For every new detail I added, I felt grandfather's faint smile widen. I spoke of how the magician stayed on the beach for 300 nights, learning tide's secret languages, until the sea surrendered the necklace willingly because it trusted him. I told how the necklace's crystal was cut from the first tear shed by the night sky when it realized dawn would always steal its place, and how returning the tear allowed darkness to feel joy again. With each sentence, stars pulsed brighter above us, and the story's logic built a temporary universe around our blanket island. When I finished, my throat was raw. My eyes brimmed with tears I blamed on night wind. Grandfather inhaled, then released a contented sigh. He squeezed my little finger the way he had when I was 7. "Good story," he murmured, barely above the bullfrog's base. "Good magic." We lay silent. Crickets thrummed like 1,000 sneakers on a gym floor. Clouds thinned until every constellation returned. I spotted tiny glints that might have been satellites or the last sparks of grandfather's smile shooting upward to join them. I brushed my thumb across the blanket's frayed hem and wondered if any single heirloom held more years of laughter than this square of fabric. Seasons changed again. Life, as it always has, pressed forward. But we never abandoned the ritual once it was revived. Whenever schedules allowed, even if I drove 10 hours for a weekend, I met him after dinner, fetched the blanket, and let our shadows vanish behind lilac leaves. When arthritis stiffened his hands too sharply to unfold the blanket, I carried both edges. When he no longer trusted his legs on uneven ground, we traded the hill's summit for the flatter patch near the willow. And when his lungs rattled too loudly to speak, I told the stories, both old and new, aloud and in whispers, believing memory would fill gaps where his voice used to be. The final summer arrived hotter than any recorded. On a twilight smeared with wildfire haze, I lifted grandfather's frail form from his chair into a wheelchair. Together we navigated the lawn. Crickets still sang though the grass had browned. When the last light bled out behind barn roofs, colors drained from his cheeks until his smile looked carved from porcelain. I began a story, something about a shooting star that landed in a farmer's field and hatched into a silver bird, but halfway through words faltered. His eyelids drooped, his hand slackened in mine. I watched the sky's velvet press closer as though to cradle him. He inhaled once more, softly, as he always did before speaking. Then his shoulders eased in a long exhale that never reversed. I stayed until dawn painted the horizon, my palm hot around his cooler fingers. When the sun cleared treetops, I kissed his forehead, folded the blanket, and pushed the wheelchair down the path. Somewhere behind me, a bullfrog croaked. Somewhere above, a tiny silver point crossed the brightening sky. Today, that blanket lives on my own front room sofa. Some threads dissolved during gentle washings, but the musty earth smell remains. Dust, lilac pollen, creek water memories. I have children now, Their summers fill with soccer camps and glowing screens, yet on certain nights, when cicadas at the edge of town chirr in the exact key of nostalgia, I pour lemonade, wait for dusk, and offer a conspiratorial wink. My youngest, curious and creative, usually notices first. She grabs the blanket, sniffs the dust smell, and follows me outside. We don't have a lilac hedge, only a privacy fence, but we do have an empty lot beyond where fireflies rise like embers. We spread the blanket under the widest part of sky we can find. We hold small fingers. We breathe that long, slow breath in unison, and I tell her how crickets borrowed their fiddles from the stars, how willows weep because they remember the comet that split its tail among their leaves, how moon fairies trade hopeful tears for courageous kindness. Every story begins with a memory and ends with possibility. Every story is a necklace returned to the neck of night. One day she will outgrow my voice, and I will outlive my knees, and a grandson or granddaughter yet unimagined will take my place beneath the blanket. But crickets will tune, bullfrogs will drum, and constellations will rearrange themselves to match any story brave enough to be spoken. And in that ongoing hush, every infinitesimal star will blink its hello, waiting for the next child, curled on faded navy cloth, to answer back with wonder. Oh. There was once a young woman whose friends had often called her the girl as bright as the sun, not only because her hair shone the color of ripe wheat at midsummer and her skin carried a warm glow even in the heart of winter, but because her laughter, when it echoed through the narrow streets of her northern town, could lift the spirits of everyone within earshot. She had grown up in a valley carved by ancient ice, a valley so far north that during the darkest months of the year the sun barely peaked above the mountains. Yet ribbons of green and purple light dallied across the heavens almost every night. In that stark, shimmering place she learned the meaning of family, for most of her neighbors were relatives, if not by blood then by bonds of shared hardship. Fishermen who rose before dawn to check nets frozen into the river, shepherds who kept watch on hardy sheep grazing thin, frost-bitten grass, carpenters who built houses out of spruce and pine harvested on slopes where no car could climb. Between heavy snows and long twilights, the valley folk depended on one another for more than bread or wool or firewood. They depended on each other for stories told beside stoves, for songs that thawed cold mornings, for kindness freely given whenever someone's roof caved beneath snow or someone's heart caved beneath grief. In that cradle of care, the Sun Girl absorbed a lesson deeper than arithmetic or grammar. Love gathered strength when shared. Her parents nurtured the idea so gently she hardly noticed it sprouting within her, the way seeds push roots under frozen soil long before the first green shoot appears. Her mother taught reading by handing down thick novels filled with mountain storms, exile, and redemption. Her father taught music by pressing an old guitar into her hands and saying, "A song is a coat you give another soul when the wind is bad." Grandmothers taught patience through knitting, stitch by stitch, while grandfathers taught resilience by coaxing saplings to grow in stony ground. Their village school taught mathematics and history, but the Sun Girl believed the most valuable lessons occurred in kitchens where grand feathers of flour floated in sunbeams, or in barns where calves took their first shaky steps on straw. From each place she carried tokens. The smell of warm bread, the first squeaks of a violin during winter recitals, evenings spent wrapped in wool blankets on a hillside, while the aurora rippled overhead like the train of an emerald gown. She also collected friends the way some children collect river stones. There was poetic Kaya, whose diary brimmed with verses about moonlit fir trees, gentle Eli, whose laughter tumbled like loose stones down a slope, impish Soren, who could carve animal figurines out of ice blocks and leave them glowing in lamplight for passers-by to admire, and hardy twins Levi and Lars, who argued about everything yet linked arms when crossing the frozen river each January. The Sun Girl stored each friendship like a lantern inside her chest. She also cultivated a youthful habit of naming the things she loved as if they were characters in her own saga. The small wooden bridge crossing Icicle Creek she called the Whispering Arch. Her favorite hot cocoa mug she dubbed Hearthkeeper. The lone birch that grew where her valley's main road curved she deemed Sentinel. Naming anchored meaning to memory and memory to heart, so she never lost sight of what mattered. One spring, though spring in her valley presented itself as nothing more than a slightly warmer layer of gray on gray, the Sun Girl stood on a ridge overlooking the still frozen river and felt a tug as steady as river current under ice. She knew the world crossed far beyond peaks that ringed her valley like silent guardians, and she felt curiosity stretch new wings inside her. The tug urged her to follow the meltwater south, to see landscapes where twilight did not linger noon and midnight, to test her heart against unknown roads and unknown people. Wonder outweighed fear, although fear did whimper at the back of her mind because comfort, once known, is reluctant to release us. She spoke to her parents. They nodded, sharing a glance heavy with both pride and foreboding. Her mother packed smoked fish, thick socks, and a small tin of the valley's soil. Her father packed extra guitar strings, a notebook full of song chords, and a letter blessing her steps. Her friends hugged her one by one, each gifting a keepsake. Kaya offered a poem inked on vellum. Soren slipped a pocket knife carved with dancing wolves. Eli stuffed a thermos of spiced tea into her satchel. And the twins bequeathed a two-headed coin. So luck can watch your back and your front, they joked. When the day came, the valley lights shimmered as if painting a farewell across the dawn. She secured her coat, breathed deep icy air tinged with pine resin, and walked away down the only road, her boots crunching rhythmically. She did not know her destination, only that the urge to journey was louder than the call to stay. As she descended the valley mouth, she glimpsed the last of the northern lights fading into pale spring sunrise, and though her chest pinched, she pressed on. Not long after leaving the high country, she reached the first toll booth. It stood at a fork where the single snowy track broadened into a tidy gravel roadway. The booth was small, roofed in cedar shingles, and beside its window hung a sign painted in 3 languages. 1 bag forward, extra weight stopped. Inside sat a calm toll master, a person older than pine rings, older than glacier melt, with silver hair cascading like water over shoulders cloaked in wool. They smiled, but their eyes glinted with firm resolve. "Traveler," the tollmaster said, voice as crisp as birch bark peeling in frost. "To follow the path toward who you could yet become, you must lighten your load." The sun girl glanced at her pack, barely half full by her reckoning. "But I carry only bread rations, a change of clothes, and mementos." The tollmaster shook their head gently, as if sorrowful at repeating rules they did not wish to enforce. 1 bag forward, extra weight stopped. The sun girl considered. She could turn back and abandon the journey, or shed objects. Determined, she set down her heavy book of valley legends, her cracked vinyl record of lullabies, the tin of soil, and even her portable kettle for late-night cocoa. Each item she kissed before arranging it neatly by the booth wall. When finished, her pack felt lighter, but her heart thudded heavy. Still, the tollmaster thanked her and waved her through. She walked on, promising herself she would retrieve every belonging someday. Fields replaced granite. New valleys opened, wide and shallow, dotted with villages that smelled of peat smoke. In one village, she helped repair a windmill after unseasonably early storms tore its sails. In another, she taught children to build miniature sleds from twigs and watch them skitter down mud banks. The sun girl witnessed meadows carpeted with buttercups, forests humming with bees. She learned local lullabies, trading one of her father's star songs for a flaxen shawl woven with river patterns. Every day, new faces and new customs shaped her thoughts. But inside, she carried a private ache. Though she collected friendships like hesitant rays of sun on late spring fields, she missed the profound safety of her childhood network, missed being known completely. She could not deny a yearning to belong wholly again. Months later, the road ran beside a coastal cliff. Gulls shrieked above. A new toll booth appeared, larger than the first, perched at the far end of a narrow bridge spanning a sea channel. Sun-bleached boards spelled the same decree. 1 bag forward, extra weight stopped. The tollmaster here looked younger, though their eyes bore the same ageless clarity. "Traveler, lighten your load once more." The sun girl's chest tightened. She had already pared herself to near necessity, yet she found the rules unyielding. She laid down her sleeping in habit, meaning the luxury of rising only when the sun had climbed. She set aside evenings of perfect solitude with only crickets and her own breath. She surrendered dignity in the sense that no one here spoke her language fluently enough to catch her nuance. To communicate, she flailed with gestures and broken grammar, often sparking chuckles among the locals. she parted with the gift of anonymity. Because her sun-bright hair, her unfamiliar vowels, her wonderstruck manner all marked her as foreign wherever she went. She packed these intangible weights into nothing visible, yet she felt them slide from her shoulders as surely as stones, leaving a raw emptiness. She signed the booth ledger with trembling hand, accepted a stamped token, and crossed the channel under circling gulls. Down the coast she found work gutting silver fish whose scales glittered like spilled starlight. Inland she picked grapes that popped sweet between her teeth. She learned to dance to fiddles that lilted quicker than her hometown waltzes and to season soups with herbs she could barely pronounce. People greeted her kindly, but none had known her mother's bread or seen her valley lights. When dawn spread rose over vineyards, she sometimes imagined peanut-sized stars still dancing in that northern sky. At night in bunkhouses she dreamt of mountain outlines and friends laughing on ice. Yet she woke each morning hungry to see what lay beyond the next ridge. Years carved themselves into the soles of her boots. She mended them with patches of varied leather until each foot carried a quilt of journeys. Sometimes she discovered a new delight, like orange blossom honey swirling into black tea or a harbor town where sea lions barked at full moon. Sometimes she discovered loss, like letters from home that arrived damp, words smeared by snowmelt before they left the Valley Mail Depot. One autumn evening she reached the edge of a vast desert. Its dunes shimmered gold even in twilight, and the wind carried spice scents from caravans. Right where the last oasis palmettos stood, she found a third toll booth, taller than both before, carved with runes older than any tongue she knew. Its sign bore the same sentence but in deeper ink. One bag forward, extra weight stopped. The tollmaster this time wore no clear age. Their eyes mirrored summer sky, winter ice, and starless midnight all at once. They waited without impatience. The sun girl set her pack down and said, in a voice cracked from travel but still glowing, "I have nothing left but the people in my heart. They weigh nothing physical, yet they mean more than tapestry or bread or dawn. Please, do not ask me to part with them." Her plea tumbled out like water from a bursting dam. She described Kaya's poems written by lantern, Eli's tea that smelled of cinnamon, Soren's ice wolves glinting under aurora, Levi and Lars flipping their lucky coin. She described parents singing a lullaby of returning light, the valley's hush under falling snow. She wept silently at first, then loudly, tears leaving salt streaks on dusty cheeks. The tollmaster listened without moving until her sobs dwindled to sniffles. Then, voice smooth as wind across dune, they repeated the decree. "Traveler, lighten your load once more. The journey ahead is too long for anything extra. Only the essential remains." The sun girl felt her knees fail. She fell to the desert floor, sand chilling despite daylight heat still trapped below the surface. Memories of those she loved circled her like protective flames. She saw Kaya's shy grin, Eli's freckled grin, her father's hands strumming hope, her mother's eyes brimming comfort. Losing them felt like tearing free the last anchor from her chest. Yet a quiet thought crept in alongside despair. Maybe the tollmaster did not mean annihilation, only safekeeping. She pictured a hidden shelf inside the booth, safe from wind and scorpions, where each beloved could rest until she called. Did she trust such care? Trust required risk. She stood slowly, dusted her skirt, dried her face. With deliberate respect she cupped invisible shapes, each person, each memory, and placed them, one by one, onto the booth's wide windowsill. With every placement she whispered names, virtues, thanks. When finished she pressed trembling lips to the glass, leaving a faint mark. Then she stepped back, shoulders light beyond belief or understanding. The tollmaster nodded, eyes now soft as dusk. A door in the dunes parted and revealed a narrow path gleaming silver under the first star. She walked. Nights in the desert were colder than the valley's worst storms, but she kept moving. Days scorched, mirages tempted with phantom valley hills. Yet her heart, though emptied, burned steady. Time lost meaning. She measured progress by subtle shifts. Dunes changed from ochre to streaked white, constellations pivoted overhead. Unknown constellations joined them. At last she emerged into a place unlike any map, a plateau of shaded terraces and waterfalls tumbling from heights that touched sunrise. There, at the edge of mist, the tollmaster waited again, though this one looked identical to all before and yet entirely new, as if many forms shared one soul. Their cloak shimmered with embroidery of countless journeys. Beside them stood shelves upon shelves. There lay her books and records, kettle and soil tin, guitar strings and quilted boots. There lay sleeping in mornings bottled like fog, solitude packaged like feather pillows, dignity folded like pressed linen. There stood the northern lights, contained yet bright in their jar of living glass. There rose miniature mountains carved in crystal. And in front, on a velvet cushion, stood her loved ones, not physically, but as radiant silhouettes humming joy, their essence captured unmarred. They shone with colors unseen before, the walled-up sunlight of her own devotion finally free. The tollmaster said nothing. The sun girl fell to her knees, overcome by gratitude. She saw clearly that none of her notes of love had disappeared. They had been guarded while she crossed deserts of self-becoming. She realized further that her new self had room enough to carry every gift without exhaustion. By releasing them temporarily, she had grown strong enough to hold them forever. She stood and embraced Kaya's laugh shaped like a soft breeze, Eli's warmth shaped like sunrise tea, Soren's humor shaped like ice wolves still glinting. She laced fingers with the parental blessing that hummed like guitar strings. The items rejoined her not as heavy burdens, but as weightless prisms through which her inner light refracted more beautifully. When she turned, she caught her reflection in the clear pool formed beneath a waterfall. She hardly recognized the traveler. Eyes keen and steady, shoulders set, posture both humble and unbreakable. She understood she had become who she could yet become, and that this becoming was not an end but another threshold. Still, the plateau felt like home because home was now inside her. She bowed to the tollmaster and whispered, "Thank you," knowing those words carried the weight of continents. The tollmaster smiled, then beckoned her to look behind. Down the valley path streamed thousands of travelers, each bearing burdens, each limping toward toll booths. She would greet them, share water, share her story. She would assure them their sacrifices were held safe. She would become guide and guardian, a living testament that love entrusted to mercy returns multiplied. Under setting sun, her valley's lights shimmered unexpectedly on distant clouds. A sign, perhaps, that home rejoiced in her transformation. She lifted her arms, radiant, ready to serve, and in that place of arriving and departing, she lived not happily ever after in static rest, but joyfully ever onward in wise, unending motion, her soul forever bright as the sun. Oh. Lucille stood at the open doorway of the small brick house they had rented for 6 years, her fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the edge of her skirt, trying to remember how she used to greet her husband before suspicion began to rule her thoughts. The day was warm for early spring, yet a faint wind carried the sharp smell of the paper mill east of town, the same scent she associated with long afternoons waiting for David to come home. She had told herself all morning to stay calm when she saw him, to let the worries go, but the minute his truck pulled up to the curb, the silence inside her felt heavier than a winter storm. She wanted to run into his arms, to feel the steady thud of his heart beneath his thick jacket and let that rhythm wash away every doubt. Yet her legs rooted to the floorboards as if they had grown there. When David stepped through the doorway, tall and tired and eager, she tried to summon a smile, but the ghost of the newspaper story flickered in her mind. The murdered truck stop waitress, the police scanner reports, and the whispers from neighbors about drivers who lived 2 lives. She swallowed hard, raised her chin, and forced her lips into a shape that was neither smile nor frown. David took for long steps and wrapped his arms around her waist, bending his head to breathe in the faint perfume she used whenever he was due home. It had once reminded him of sweet peaches at the height of summer, the kind his grandmother used to slice over pound cake. But Lucille's body was stiff, rigid as a garden post left all winter in frozen ground. He felt her shoulders lock, her arms stay limp at her sides, and his heart sank. The homecoming he had pictured during 900 miles of highway was not going to happen. Still, he squeezed gently and whispered, "I missed you, Lou." She pulled back, her eyes dark with hurt, and without a word she vanished toward the kitchen. Her voice echoed down the hall a second later, sharper than broken glass. "You did not call, David. You did not call even once." Their daughter Marietta, hearing her mother's raised voice, dropped her doll on the rug and sprinted from the kitchen. She was 7, all elbows and knees, with a head full of golden curls that refused every attempt at taming. Her laughter bounced around the narrow hallway like sunlight off water. She flew into David's arms with such force that he nearly stumbled, but he caught her up easily, planting a quick kiss on her forehead. He drank in the familiar scent of soap and bubblegum, marveling at how much she had grown in the 3 weeks he'd been hauling seed potatoes from Idaho to Georgia. Behind him, Lucille's voice cracked again, raw and splintered. "Let her go, David. Put Marietta down. Stop hugging on her like that." David turned halfway, still holding the child. He knew Lucille's tone too well, a brittle mix of jealousy and fear, the sound of a heart that had stewed too long in loneliness. He set Marietta on her feet, but not before twirling her once, eliciting a squeal of delight. "That's my floppy bunny," he said, trying to keep his voice light. "Stay right here, sugar. I'll see you in 2 shakes." Marietta giggled and bounced onto the overstuffed couch, straight into the pile of laundry Lucille hadn't folded. David watched her for a beat, letting the pure joy in her eyes warm his chest, and then he followed the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. The kitchen smelled of simmering beans, cornbread, and the mystery of Lucille's silence. He found her at the counter, a wooden spoon clenched tight, stirring broth that did not need stirring. Her posture was like a statue, shoulders drawn up, chin tilted down, jaw clenched. He knew better than to surprise her, so he cleared his throat and stepped closer. "Lou, I know you read that story," he began. "I know you're worried, but I'm not like those men in the paper." Lucille kept her eyes on the pot. "You didn't call," she said again, softer this time but no less accusing. "Not one word." David sighed. "I got tied up at the Amarillo yard, then had to push through a detour after Memphis. There was a pileup, lanes closed, state troopers waving us off. By the time I thought to stop, I was behind schedule. Dispatch has been cutting guys who miss deadlines. I was worried about keeping my job. You know how it is." She slammed the spoon down, splashing broth across the stovetop. "Don't talk to me about worry. I was up nights imagining a badge showing up at the door." Marietta kept asking why Daddy ain't calling. What could I say? He's too busy working? He's hugging some truck stop tramp? You tell me. Her voice rose, cracking on the last word. David took a slow breath, fighting the urge to defend every mile he had driven. "Those articles, it's always the same handful of fools making the rest of us look bad. Lou, I keep a picture of you 2 clipped to the visor. I think of you every hour." He reached for her again. She jerked away. "Words, David. Just words." He took her shoulders gently and tried to turn her. She trembled. "I love you, Lucille. I love our girl. That's never changed. How many others were you hugging while you were gone?" She spat. "How many little floppy bunnies in truck stops and cheap motels?" He bit back frustration. "I'm exhausted, Lou. I haul day and night to keep us afloat. The Depression's closing businesses, cutting lines. Only the best-timed loads get paid. One slip and we're scrambling. I miss one call and suddenly you think I'm sleeping around? Killing waitresses." Her eyes flashed. "Don't twist my words. You could have spared 60 seconds. You chose not to." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. The familiar ache settled behind his eyes, a dull weight of defeat. "I can't keep doing this dance every time I walk through the door," he muttered. "Marietta hears us. She thinks it's her fault we yell." Lucille's face softened just a fraction, but anger quickly reassembled. "Maybe she wouldn't hear if you didn't disappear." David raised both hands in surrender. "Fine, I'm stepping out. Need smokes. You need anything." She looked away. He left the kitchen, grabbed his cap, and slipped outside into thick evening air. The diner 10 minutes up the road buzzed under flickering red neon. David stomped rainwater off his boots and nudged the glass door open. The waitress, a woman with a ponytail the color of copper pennies, hurried over with a practiced smile and a coffee pot. He lifted a hand, declining. "Just using the cigarette machine," he said, voice low. She nodded, her smile already redirecting to another customer. David slid coins into the clattering box, felt the pack drop. He pocketed it, glanced around, and realized every booth held men who looked a little like him. Tired faces, calloused palms, shoulders sagging under invisible loads. He suddenly wanted a drink to burn away the knot in his chest. Next door at Jarvis Bar, the amber whiskey would glow like hearthlight, soothing at least for an hour. But the memory of flashing police lights crossing the diner window made him hesitate. He pictured dispatch noting a DUI on his record, the company invoices unpaid, Lucille's scowl deepening. He cursed under his breath, stepped back into the rain, and turned home with only the cigarettes. By the time he reached the house, damp jeans clinging to his legs, he had convinced himself a single shot of whiskey from the half-hidden bottle in the truck cab wouldn't count. That rationalization faltered when he fumbled the key, tripped over the threshold, and nearly knocked over the coat stand. The whiskey had turned into several shots, courage into reckless bravado. He tossed his jacket over a chair, boots off with a thunk, and lumbered to the bedroom where Lucille feigned sleep. He stripped striped work shirt and grease-flecked pants, flinging them in a heap. Lucille lay curled away, pillow barricaded against his side. David's heart hammered with need. Need for comfort, for forgiveness, for the warmth that once flowed freely between them. He eased under the covers, moved closer until he felt the heat of her back through the thin nightgown. He whispered her name, fingers brushing her arm. She stiffened, muttering, "Your breath smells like turpentine." He pressed again, voice thick, "Lou, I need to feel you." The rejection he feared flickered in her eyes as she rolled over. She looked small in the dim lamplight, face pale, lips drawn tight. "What do you want, David?" She sounded so tired he almost withdrew. Almost. But the whiskey insisted on hope. He leaned in, tried to kiss her cheek. She pressed her hand to his chest. "Don't," she warned softly. "Not like this." He ignored warning, thinking a kiss would rekindle what was lost. He grabbed her wrist, nudged closer. She tensed, a shudder of panic rippling through her limbs. "David, stop." Her voice cracked. He pressed forward, desperate, blinded by longing. She shoved at him, tears sliding across her cheeks, raw fear in her eyes. His foggy mind registered alarm too late. In a flash of regret he froze, realized what he was doing, and recoiled as though struck. He rolled off the bed, hit the floor, scrabbled for clothing. Shame roared inside his skull. He pulled boots on bare feet, snatched shirt and pants, and fled the room. Lucille's sobs trailed behind him, each one slicing deeper than a whip. He stood half-dressed in the hallway, heart pounding, listening to her weep. The ring on his finger felt like molten metal. He clawed at it, skin tearing until it slipped off, leaving a smear of blood. He slammed it on the hallway table, gripping the edge as dizziness washed through him. He paced from living room to kitchen, mind a ravaged field. He had nearly forced himself on his wife. The thought sickened him. The marriage he had tried to protect from rumors was collapsing, not by infidelity but by his own brutality. He muttered, "She'll never trust me again." He looked at the telephone on the wall, fingered the receiver, then recoiled. Calls had caused their fight. Calls now could not fix anything. A small voice startled him. "Daddy!" Marietta stood in the hallway, clutching a cloth rabbit by one torn ear. Her eyes were wide pools of worry. "I had a bad dream," she said, voice wobbly. "A monster was taking you away." David knelt, heart cracking. He gathered her in his arms, held her tight. "Daddy's here," he whispered. "It's just a dream." She sniffled. He carried her to her room, tucked her under pastel blankets, smoothed curls from her forehead. "Everything will be okay," he promised, though he doubted every word. She closed her eyes, trusting him completely. He felt unworthy of that trust. Back in the hallway, he stared at the front door. Inside the bedroom, Lucille's sobs had quieted to ragged breathing. David pressed his palm to the cool wood of the door. He believed the best gift he could give was distance. Space for Lucille to breathe without his shadow, for Marietta to grow without shouting matches etched into her memory. He wrote a note on an old gas receipt. "I am sorry. I will send money. I love you both." He folded it, placed it next to the blood-streaked ring, and stepped outside, leaving the weight of the world behind but carrying the heavier weight of his failure. Once upon a time, high above the sleeping planet, there lived a young son named Sol. Her home was a hidden corner of a vast golden cloud palace, a place woven from threads of pure light and soft vapor. Each dawn, Sol rose from her round nest of warm rays, the very same shining bed that had cradled her since the day she first opened her bright eyes. It was tradition in her family. Her mother before her and her grandmother before that had followed the same gentle rhythm, gliding from one edge of the sky to the other, pouring warmth and light over the world below. On most mornings, Sol greeted her task with cheerful energy, eager to watch the planet wake. Yet, on this particular day, she sensed a hush in the air, a silence heavy enough to reach even her palace in the clouds. When she peeked over the eastern rim of the world, she noticed shadows that clung more stubbornly than usual, pockets of darkness that her morning glow could not fully chase away. Something felt wrong. She called to her friend, the morning star, who was finishing his nightly patrol and preparing to dim for the day. "I feel the earth is different today," she murmured, her voice a soft flicker. "It seems heavier, as though a sigh is caught in its chest." The morning star pulsed with gentle twilight light and gave a knowing wink. "Perhaps the world is yearning for more than a routine sunrise," he replied. "It may need not just your brilliance, but also your kindness. Give it both, and see what happens." Sol thought for a brief heartbeat. Then, instead of lifting straight into her usual arc across the sky, she chose a daring plan. She would draw closer to Earth than any of her kin had done in ages, close enough to listen as well as shine. She placed one slender ray through a break in the clouds and followed it downward like a glimmering ribbon. Her first stop was a small village tucked between gentle hills. From above, the settlement looked peaceful, yet the streets below were silent. No children played chase, no merchants opened shutters, and every door stood closed as though nailed shut. Curious and troubled, Sol whispered to a sparrow perched on a crooked fence post. "Why do the windows hide from morning? They have lost their smiles," chirped the little bird, fluttering his wings with a nervous twitch. The winter was long, the harvest was thin, and hopes ran out with the grain. People fear that even laughter costs too much. The sparrow flew away in an anxious blur, but Sol remained, hovering in the still air. Instead of shining with her full strength, she softened her glow until it felt like a comforting hand on a tired shoulder. She sent this tender warmth toward one shutter, then another. Tiny slivers of light slipped through the cracks, painting lines of gold on cold wooden floors. Inside the first cottage, a little girl rubbed her sleepy eyes and noticed the gentle beam playing on the wall. Her frown lifted, just a little. In the house next door, a young mother touched the golden stripe on her baby's blanket and felt a calm confidence bloom in her chest. House by house, window by window, the village brightened in spirit before it brightened in sight. Soon the doors creaked open, and cautious feet stepped onto the street to greet the day. Encouraged, Sol drifted westward. Above a deep forest, she found another pocket of stubborn night, where towering trees blocked nearly every hint of daylight. The growth beneath the canopy struggled for breath. She floated low, weaving through branches until she reached the mossy floor. There, she brushed her light across the smallest saplings, slender shoots that had waited patiently for a chance to stretch. Her rays felt like warm fingers coaxing them upward, leaves unfurled, trembling yet eager, catching tiny droplets of sunlight as though sipping from silver cups. A hush of gratitude passed through the forest as countless green voices whispered thanks. Sol's journey carried her next over a bustling city of stone and glass. She could see people moving in hurried lines, eyes fixed on the ground, shoulders bent beneath invisible loads. Horns blared, machines roared, and yet there was no shared laughter between them. Sol skimmed above the rooftops and let her reflection dance in every window, on every windshield, and across every puddle left by a recent spring rain. Suddenly, the dull gray facade of the city shimmered like polished crystal. A woman hurrying to work paused to admire a rainbow glint on the hood of a parked car. A man waiting at a bus stop noticed the bright flicker in his coffee's surface and felt the corners of his mouth lift. On a quiet corner, a little girl wearing a red coat discovered that her shadow could bow and wave. She giggled and began an elaborate shadow dance, stomping and twirling. Other children joined her until the sidewalk became a playful stage, each figure bending and stretching in the sunlight's command. Even the busiest businessman slowed, a surprised smile softening his serious face as he witnessed this simple theater of light. Beyond the crowded streets, Sol rose again until mountain peaks dusted with snow appeared beneath her. In a narrow canyon, she discovered a solitary eagle perched on icy rocks. His feathers were sleek and strong, but caution had frozen his spirit. For many seasons he had not dared to leap. Sol quietly warmed the chilled air, creating soft columns of rising heat. These unseen hands lifted beneath the eagle's wings, urging them open. At first he only hopped, then he spread his wings in a slow, shaking stretch. Sol kept her warmth steady. The eagle caught a gentle updraft, glided a cautious yard, and then, remembering the sky's embrace, tilted his wings and climbed. His cry echoed through the canyon, a fierce, joyful declaration of freedom shared with the bright sun who had believed in him. Sol traveled on, crossing a valley where drought had turned the grass brittle and the flowers faint with thirst. She knew she could not summon rain, yet she could coax moisture from hidden reserves. She found a lingering patch of dew nestled in a shaded hollow and focused her warmth upon it. Slowly, the tiny droplets rose in a shimmering mist, gathering overhead into a small pearly cloud. The cloud drifted like a curious lamb until it hovered above the wilting meadow, where it gently released its treasure in a soft spray. Flowers lifted their petals to drink. Their faded colors revived into cheerful pinks, yellows, and blues. A cluster of butterflies, once sluggish and dull, sprang into the air. As they flitted from bloom to bloom, the scales of their wings caught Sol's light and painted bright fragments of rainbow across the field. Near the middle of the world, Sol reached a broad beach where waves rolled onto warm sand. She noticed clusters of tiny sea turtle hatchlings wandering in confusion, drawn inland by porch lights instead of moonlight. With careful timing, Sol tilted herself, sending a stream of glittering reflections across the gentle swells. The rippling road glowed gold, calling the hatchlings toward safety. One after another, they turned and paddled over the sand, leaving delicate star-shaped tracks. When the first wave touched their shells, they paddled harder, each splash marked by sparks of sunlight dancing on water. From her low perch in the sky, Sol saw a small girl near the shoreline. The child gathered shells and stones, arranging them in neat rows that stretched like a necklace across the damp sand. When she noticed how Sol's beams made her treasures gleam, she chose her finest find, a spiral shell with colors that shifted like liquid jewels. Stretching on tiptoe, she lifted the shell high. "Thank you, sun," she shouted with all her small strength. "You make everything sparkle." Touched, Sol sent a single, slender ray to brush the shell. It glowed from within, taking on a steady blush of starlight. Sol made a quiet vow to remember that magical swirl of color. Later, when conditions were perfect, she would let similar bursts of rainbow appear in the sky. Sundogs, humans would call them. Small reminders that gratitude never goes unnoticed. Farther north, Sol saw animals clustered on a frozen lake, bellies empty, tongues dry. She descended until her breath melted a neat circle of ice. The water beneath shimmered in newfound freedom, and the thirsty creatures trotted forward one by one. Hares, foxes, a family of deer, to drink deeply. A fawn, curious and bold, nuzzled the warm beam that hovered above the opening, and Sol felt laughter rumble in her light. Hour after hour, she journeyed, leaving pockets of ease wherever she paused. In alleyways once cold and uninviting, children now played tag, chasing sunlit shapes that bounced between walls. In houses once dim, curtains were tied back eagerly, welcoming warmth inside. Forest paths once hidden in gloom glittered under shafts of gold, inviting wanderers to explore. Even the shadows themselves seemed changed. Instead of pools of fear, they became playful companions, sketches that shifted and danced, adding depth and beauty to every illuminated scene. At last, crimson and amber hues signaled the evening's approach. Sol felt a pleasant tiredness settle into her core, yet it was a sweet fatigue, the kind that follows a day rich with purpose. She lifted herself above the world once more, preparing to return to the hidden palace of clouds. The night sky, deep blue and sprinkled with the first bold stars, awaited her arrival. "Welcome home," the night sky greeted, his voice a quiet hum. "You glowed with extra care today." Sol glanced down at the planet slowly turning beneath her. She saw golden afterglows lingering on rooftops, in treetops, and on rippling lakes. She sensed hearts still warmed by the touch of her presence. The village children laughing in twilight, the eagle roosting high with feathers fluffed in contentment, the turtles safe beneath moonlit waves, the butterflies asleep beneath petals. A hush of peaceful satisfaction rose to meet her. "I learned something," Sol said softly, settling into her round nest of rays. "It isn't enough just to pass overhead. Some mornings call for a pause, a closer look, a gentle hand." The night sky twinkled in agreement. And what of tomorrow? Sol closed her eyes, yet her mind drifted outward. She pictured secret gardens waiting for dawn's first kiss, deep ravines chilled by long nights, lonely lighthouses eager for a friend to reflect upon. She thought of towns buzzing with new plans, fields stirring under moon-cooled soil, rivers dreaming of the glow that will make them shimmer. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I will rise as always, but I'll listen too. There is always someone, somewhere, who needs a moment of patience, a ray of kindness, a glance of light." The night sky nodded, drawing its velvet cloak a little tighter. Stars leaned in to hear the promise. Comets, traveling the far-stretching highways of space, carried rumors of a sun who dipped low to heal. In her palace, Sol curled into her nest. The familiar rays embraced her, yet they sparkled with new memory, sparkled with children's laughter, rustling leaves, dancing shadows, and the soft glow of a shell held high by grateful hands. She was the same sun, yet she was changed, her radiance enriched by every life she had gently touched. Below, lanterns flickered in windows, bonfires sent lazy spirals of smoke into the cool dusk, and candle flames quivered beside beds where stories of the extraordinary day were shared. Some might believe it a dream come morning, but the warmth lingering in their chests would prove otherwise. If you watch carefully on any bright day, you may notice moments when the light lingers a heartbeat longer. A single beam resting on a wilting flower until it lifts its head. A sudden sparkle that makes an old fountain look like flowing gold. A patch of living light that nudges a passing stranger to smile. When you see such things, you have found Sol at work, pausing to give the extra attention she learned to offer on the day she slipped from her throne of clouds and listened to the world speak. And somewhere, perhaps in a quiet village, perhaps beside a canyon ridge, perhaps on a faraway beach, there will be laughter, flight, blooming, or safe return. All because a young sun chose to shine a little closer, a little kinder, and a little longer than required by duty alone. The wind that morning was only a tired breath, the tail end of a storm that had bullied the sea for 2 full days. Even so, clouds still smeared the sky in wide gray streaks, and the swells rolled slowly like the chest of a giant still half asleep. Over that restless water sailed the Black Rose, a small, sturdy Bermuda sloop whose sails hung in ribbons. What canvas remained had been patched with whatever cloth the crew could spare. Old shirts, table linen, even a length of faded flag. But every scrap was stretched tight to keep one wounded merchantman in sight. Captain Ezekiel Banks squinted into the gloom. His first mate, Robbie, shared the long tiller with him. They had worked side by side for 3 years and needed few words to understand each other. The captain lifted a salt-caked hand and pointed ahead. "Still see her?" he asked, though it was more habit than question. Robbie nodded. A dim shadow, barely a mile distant, bobbed on the uneven horizon. She was the Perseverance, a brig built for trade, but she looked worse than the pirates chasing her. Her mainmast had snapped during the gale, leaving only a stump and a sagging length of rigging that trailed in the water like a broken arm. Still, her foremast held 2 ragged squares of sail, enough to keep her crawling west. For 2 nights and a day the Rose had clung to that trail, driven by hope of spoils and stubborn pride. Banks let the tiller rest in the crook of his elbow and surveyed his men. They lay where they had collapsed once the worst winds passed. 20 bodies sprawled across deck planks, on coil after coil of soaked rope, on piles of empty canvas. A few snored. Others stared without blinking, too weary to sleep. Hands blistered, eyes red, clothes hanging loose on frames that shook with each swell. Tyrell, the bosun, stood at the break in the quarterdeck. He balanced like a man who had been born at sea, though his clothes hung heavy with salt. Banks lifted an eyebrow. "The lads need fire in the belly," he called. "See what grub we have left." Tyrell saluted with 2 fingers and stumped off. A murmur rippled through the crew at the promise of food and drink, but no one rose yet. Banks's lips cracked when he tried to smile. A storm this fierce could humble any vessel, yet they had survived it, and the chase was almost over. Robbie ducked into the tiny cabin and returned with a flask and a small loaf wrapped in linen. He poured a swallow of watered rum into the cap and held it to his captain, then took a sip himself. They shared the bread in silence, savoring the softness. Gradually daylight uncovered a gentler sea. The clouds retreated to the edges of the sky, tall as city walls, magnificent in retreat. The water, freed from the storm's fists, turned a pale green laced with white. One by one the crew lifted stiff heads, gathered coils, tightened lines. Wordlessly they hoisted every rag that could catch wind. Bits of sailcloth, shirts tied to boat hooks, a flag nailed crooked to the mizzen shrouds. The Black Rose answered, groaning like a beast waking, and her bow pressed a sharper line through the swell. Off the wind, a brig should have left a single-masted sloop far behind. But the Perseverance limped. Her broken mast forced her crew to run under reduced canvas, and what cloth remained was rotten with age or shredded by the gale. Each minute brought the 2 ships closer. Tyrell returned to the quarterdeck. "We'll have that French lady in our arms before sunset, Captain." His grin flashed beneath a crust of dried salt. Banks nodded. "She'll fetch a fine price if we can sail her home." "Boys are ready," Tyrell went on. "They'd rather seize her than fight, but they'll fight if needs be." The afternoon slid by in hard work and hard silence. The wind freshened, and the sloop surged forward, until by late day she hovered 200 yards astern of her prey. From the Rose's bow, musketeers could see faces peering over the brig's taffrail. Pinched, anxious faces that vanished whenever a pirate aimed his weapon. On deck the Black Rose seethed with steel. Muskets rested across coils, pistols tucked into belts. Knives glimmered at every hip. Tattered black scarves flapped at the throat of each man like small, vicious flags. The moment felt ripe. Banks strode to the forecastle and raised his voice above wind and wave. "Run up, lads. Give 'em hell." A roar erupted. Muskets spat smoke and flame. Bullets ricocheted off rail and hinge. Pirates leaped onto the bowsprit, brandishing blades, spitting curses that promised misery to any soul aboard the merchantman. For an instant it worked. A white sheet fluttered up the Perseverance's spanker gaff. Surrender, or so it seemed. Her crew slacked their lines, and her sails spilled wind, slowing her until the Rose nosed alongside. Then 6 gun ports snapped open. No pirate had time to shout a warning. Cannon fire tore from the brig's flank. The blast shredded the Rose's rails and smashed through her waist. Men flew backward in sprays of blood and splinters. An entire knot of boarders vanished as a ball chewed through their ranks. Smoke rolled over the water thick as fog, and screams rose inside it. Banks stood frozen, mouth half open, a pistol forgotten in his fist, with shards pattered around him like hail. He saw Robbie crumpled at his feet, a sliver of mass driven deep into his side but still smiling as if to say, "We nearly had her, Captain, almost." Hard a port. Banks barked at his own body before his mind caught up. His hands shoved the tiller left. The sloop heeled, groaning, and clawed away from the brig. Behind, the enemy crew shouted for new charges. Gun carriages rolled back, iron scraped deck. The Rose, wounded and staggering, limped into the dusk. Robbie's breath rattled. He whispered, "Sorry, Captain. Thought I'd marry that girl on Grand Cayman next time we made port." Banks's answer was a silence broken only by a sob he refused to let loose. He felt the sloop quiver under him, felt the sea pressing close. The last light of day bled into the water, then everything went black. Whether minutes or years passed, Banks could not say. One moment he floated in warm darkness, staring at far-off sparks that might have been stars or might have been the lanterns of drowned ships. The next, he stood again on the deck of the Black Rose, under a gentle sun. Every plank was fresh, every rope coiled tidy, every sail new and white. His men bustled about, hale and laughing as if they had enjoyed an easy voyage with fair wind and kind seas. Banks gripped the rail. Had the battle been a dream after all? He looked for scars on wood, for bloodstains, but saw none. Robbie strode past him carrying a bucket, whole and whistling. The captain reached out, touched his arm. Flesh and blood, warm beneath the sleeve. "Good morning, Captain," Robbie said. "Fine day for sailing." Banks tried to speak, found his throat stiff. He swallowed. He managed. "Fine." Land appeared by late afternoon, a scatter of low islands green as emeralds. Palms waved in the breeze. The Rose slipped toward a narrow cut through the reef. A channel Banks had never sailed yet somehow knew by heart. He felt the sloop respond to each twitch of the helm as though she obeyed his thoughts before his hands moved. By twilight they lay at anchor in a small lagoon. On the shore, 3 thatched huts huddled under coconut trees. Faint lamplight glimmered inside. Laughter drifted across the water, carried on warm air scented with smoke and salt. Boats were lowered. Not a voice spoke above a whisper. Sacks, heavy, muffled, passed from hand to hand. Oars dipped without splash, and the pirates reached the beach in silence. Sandside under boot heels still damp from deck wash. Tyrell signaled. 2 men waited with the gigs while the rest crept toward the huts, knives ready in case of dogs or watchmen. Yet no alert sounded. Only a soft surf murmur and the rustle of palm leaves gave life to the night. Inside the first hut, a family of 7 nestled around a rough wooden table. Their garments were patched yet clean. A single iron pot steamed, filling the room with the scent of fish stew. Candles lit every corner, gilding each face with patient joy. The father, a thin man with honest eyes, bowed his head. Mother and children did the same, hands joined. The father prayed aloud, voice low but steady. "Lord above, thank you for keeping us safe from storm and sickness. Thank you for fish in our nets and roots in our garden. Thank you for my dear wife and these little ones who brighten my days. Grant that we always share what we are given. Amen." "Amen," whispered every small voice. After the blessing, the father reached behind his chair and produced a gunny sack. 5 apples tumbled out, bright red, polished like gems. The children squealed. An apple was a treasure on such an island, a taste of distant orchards where winter frosts kissed blossoms into sweetness. Before any child could bite, a gentle tap sounded at the door. The father rose. Outside he found 2 larger burlap sacks set upon the step. No person waited in the shadows, and the sand bore no fresh footprints. He dragged the gifts inside. The family gathered close as he opened the first bundle. A roasted goose lay within, wrapped in waxed cloth still warm from an unseen oven. Alongside it sat parcels tied with twine. The second sack held more boxes. Toys carved of wood, a doll stitched in bright scraps, a shining machete, a brand new Bible whose leather cover smelled of tanned oak. Wonder filled the room like golden light. The youngest child clapped tiny hands. The eldest touched the machete's handle with reverence. Imagining fields cleared faster, yams lifted smoother. Mother lifted the doll, tears bright in her tired eyes. The father hurried outside again. He climbed a small rise, squinting across the lagoon. A full moon had climbed high enough to pour silver over the water, and there, beyond the reef, a Bermuda sloop sailed away. Her sails glowed pale as pearl. She slipped between coral outcrops where no safe passage seemed possible. Yet she never slowed, never grounded. Trails of moonlight streamed from her hull like the tail of a shooting star. The island man watched until the sloop passed from his sight, heading for some far horizon known only to mariners and ghosts. Then he bowed his head and whispered another prayer, one of gratitude for strangers whose hearts, whatever their history, had softened enough to give. At dawn, the Black Rose rode a gentle breeze once more. Captain Banks stood alone at the bow. The island shrank behind them. Shore birds circled in the pink sky, calling farewells. Robbie appeared with 2 mugs of watered rum and handed one over. "Fine Christmas Eve, Captain," he said. Banks startled. Christmas? He had lost all track of time in storm and battle and whatever miracle had come after. Yet, when he looked back, his memory found nothing but haze between the thunder of cannon and the quiet of that island family's table. "Christmas," Banks echoed. He felt the unfamiliar word taste clean on his salt-stung lips. The sloop's crew moved with silent purpose, every man content. They set the mainsail, trimmed the jib. No one grumbled of plunder or drank for courage. Instead, an easy calm flowed from bow to stern, as if each sailor understood he carried riches no coin could tally. A child's laughter, a Bible's promise, a doll's stitched smile. Banks closed his eyes and let the wind brush his face. He thought of the icy water, of splinters spinning through smoke, of Robbie's whispered regret. He thought of the moonlit cut through a reef no chart recorded, of the rose-scented peace that followed. Perhaps he had drowned that night. Perhaps this was some second life given as mercy. He opened his eyes. The sunrise painted the clouds in pinks and golds, colors bright enough to heal any wound. Far ahead, he could almost see a road of light leading onward, over endless sea, toward places where gifts were still needed. The Black Rose answered the wind like a living thing eager for new purpose. Captain Ezekiel Banks straightened, lifted his chin, and smiled. Behind him, sails bellied smooth and white, unstained by gunpowder, unmarked by patchwork, ready to carry one's sun-kissed crew across a changed world. He laid a hand on the rail and made a quiet vow that there would be no more broadsides fired in anger, no more screams for plunder. The sea was wide, and a man could yet make his mark by healing what storms had broken. Somewhere beyond the horizon waited other hungry tables, other children who believed miracles came on silent feet. Banks turned to Robbie. "Set our course," he said. "We'll follow the morning and see where kindness steers us." Robbie grinned, eyes bright. "Aye, Captain." A Christmas voyage, then. The sloop leaned into the breeze. Foam curled under her bow. The sea stretched ahead like a promise, and the rising sun cast a road of gold across the water, straight, shining, and full of hope for any sailor brave enough to follow. Oh. I woke to the kind of cozy warmth that makes you want to melt right back into sleep. At first, I did not even open my eyes. I simply lay there, soaking in the gentle heat that wrapped around me like a thick quilt just taken from the dryer. A soft hum drifted through the air, a hush of distant voices, the muffled thump of wooden trays, and the low roar of ovens working hard to keep the morning chill away. Somewhere nearby, a clock ticked in steady beats that reminded me of a calm heartbeat. Wrapped in comfort, I sniffed, and my whole world filled with the sweet, powerful scent of cinnamon. It floated over me, rich and happy, weaving itself together with the lighter smell of sugar and the deeper notes of warm bread. At that very moment, I decided that cinnamon must surely be the best scent on Earth, or above Earth, and I let a tiny sigh slip from my lips. A peaceful drowsiness tugged at me again. Part of me thought, why move? Why leave this perfect place? But then a cheerful bell jingled, and the air around me changed. A door opened somewhere close by, letting in a splash of crisp winter wind that skipped across my skin, tugging heat away as quickly as the fire had given it. All at once, the cozy veil of warmth grew thin, like the last embers of a fading fire. My eyes blinked open, slow and sticky, and the world jumped into view. Bright light flooded the bakery. Rows of shiny display cases ran along the walls like toy store windows, but instead of dolls or trains, they held neat lines of fresh rolls, pastries, and cookies decorated in ribbons of icing. Glass domes protected golden pies set on polished pedestals. Paper snowflakes hung above the cases on silver strings, turning slowly in the gentle air. Behind a marble counter, a short stack of gift boxes in red, green, and gold waited like a tower of treasure. And there, right beside me, lay a wide metal tray covered in pale frosting and big sprinkles that glittered like tiny jewels. I was still on the tray, had been tucked into its center on a sheet of waxed paper, and the heat I felt came from the thick block of stone beneath it, still warm from the oven. That was when I saw her. A woman in a blue wool hat and matching mittens leaned down, fogging the glass in front of me with her happy breath. She tilted her head from side to side as if comparing every treat on display, and then pointed straight at me. "I'll have that one," she told the baker, her voice bright with delight. "He looks jolly." Before I could blink, a younger girl, surely the baker's helper, slid open the case. She wore a flour-dusted apron tied tight around her waist. A dusting of sugar clung to her hair like early snow. Her fingers reached for me with the gentle confidence of someone who lifted sweets every day. Her face hovered just above my head, cheeks rosy from the heat of the ovens, eyes shining in the morning sunshine. She murmured, "Yes, he does." Everything inside me reeled. Me? Jolly? A treat to be wrapped in bright paper, tied with ribbon, and eaten in 2 bites? Oh, I was not having that. I would decide my own fate. Panic flashed through me like lightning, but along with panic came a sudden surge of courage. Something deep in my gingerbread chest reminded me that I had legs. And if I had legs, I could run. And if I could run, well, I would run. I sprang to my feet, surprising even myself with how quickly my icing-stitched boots hit the paper. "Catch me if you can," I squeaked without thinking. The helper girl yelped in shock. The bell above the door tinkled again as another customer stepped inside, and a gust of cold air flared the hem of the girl's apron. In that split second, I saw a narrow wedge of freedom. The door was open just wide enough for someone my size to dart through. I jumped, truly jumped, clearing the metal edge of the tray with room to spare, and hit the glass counter with a soft tap. I slid across its polished surface like a skater on fresh ice, arms spinning for balance. Then I hopped again. My chocolate chip buttons rattled with each leap. I landed on the wooden counter edge, teetered for half a heartbeat, and pushed off once more toward the open space. Down I went, falling farther than I expected. The shop's wooden floor rose to meet me. My boots slapped the planks, sending a sweet-smelling puff of cinnamon dust into the air. I skidded to a stop right by a pair of winter boots. A man's deep voice boomed from somewhere overhead. "What in the world?" But I was already darting forward. Ahead, the bell on the bakery door was still swinging, the gap still open. I pressed my sugared lips into a determined grin, dug my heels into the boards, and sprinted for daylight. For a moment, I feared the gap might close, but luck or courage, or perhaps the whisper of a Christmas wish, was on my side. The heavy door slowed as it eased back on its hinges, just enough that its bottom edge hovered inches above the threshold. I dove and slid beneath, feeling the chilling brush of metal above my cap of icing. Then I burst out into the high street. Everything changed in a heartbeat. Gone was the gentle heat of the bakery. Gone was the sweet fog of cinnamon and sugar. A cold wind kissed my cheeks, sharp and bracing. Snowflakes tumbled from a pewter sky, each one a tiny, spinning miracle. Tall buildings lined the street, their windows throwing back dull gray reflections. Bundled-up shoppers hurried along the sidewalk, bags swinging at their sides like overstuffed saddlebags. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifted from a cart on one corner. The sharper scent of pine from a wreath stand filled another. Sleigh bells jingled faintly somewhere far off. I shivered once, shook off the chill, and felt a rush of excitement. This was adventure. This was freedom. And freedom, I decided, was worth the cold. Behind me, the bell over the bakery door clanged loudly as it smacked back against the wall. I spun around and saw the helper girl lurch out into the swirl of snow. Her apron fluttered behind her like a flag. "Stop!" she cried. "Come back, little fellow." She had barely taken 3 steps before a young man popped out of the tea shop next door. Tall, lanky, wearing a bright red scarf that whipped back and forth across his chin. He looked like a holiday postcard come to life. He flashed the girl a quick smile. "Let me," he said with a teasing grin. "You catch a cold out here, and I'll catch your runaway gingerbread." "If you catch him," she answered, cheeks redder than her apron stains, "then maybe I will owe you a kiss." Even in her hurry, she laughed at herself. A bright, embarrassed sound in the frosty air. Her laugh tickled the edges of my heart, but I could not let sentiment slow me now. I hitched up my icing-trimmed trousers and took off, racing past boots, leaping over puddles chilled into slush, dodging stray bits of snow that splat on the ground around me. A dog barked, deep and hopeful. Out of a narrow alley trotted a small brown dog no taller than my shoulder, though it seemed enormous from my point of view. A shiny green collar bounced on his neck, its tag jingling in time with his steps. He skidded to a stop, sniffed deeply, and licked his lips. Then he lowered his head. In his eyes I saw curiosity first, but behind that flickered the spark of hunger. Oh dear. I pumped my arms and ran faster, my boots smacking the pavement in a rapid rhythm. Each stride sent my cinnamon-scented crumbs drifting behind me like breadcrumb confetti. I did not want to be that dog's snack, so I dashed beneath a wrought iron fence near a shop porch and darted across the road between the clacking wheels of a deliverman's cart. Shoppers gasped, pointing and laughing as I zigged and zagged. Someone shouted, "Harley here, boy!" The dog's owner, a tall man bundled in a voluminous purple coat, came pounding out of the alley in pursuit. The coat ballooned with every step like a sail trying to break free of its mast. "Harley, heel!" he commanded. But Harley wanted gingerbread more than obedience. The dog darted past his master, paws sliding on snow-dusted stone. Now I had a chase. The helper girl, her baker's apron fluttering. The young man, his red scarf flapping. The hungry dog, his green collar jingling. And the tall man, huffing in his big purple coat. All of them thundered after me. A parade of footsteps and laughter and indignant shouts. A small boy, no more than 6, stood near a toy shop window, clutching a wooden soldier in one mittened hand. He wore a puffy yellow jacket so bright it looked like bottled sunshine. His eyes widened as he spotted me. "Look, Mum, a gingerbread man, a real gingerbread man." "Well, I called back, mustering a brave voice. "And you won't catch me." Snow fell harder, the flakes growing fatter as if the clouds above decided to sprinkle the world with extra sugar. They clung to my frosting, melting into tiny icy beads that slid across my gingerbread skin. Every shiver reminded me that I was no ordinary kid in a wool coat, but a cookie in the middle of winter. If I slowed, I would be caught. If I was caught, well, I dared not think of that. High Street curved left. A holiday vendor's booth, festooned with twinkling lights, blocked half the walk. People crowded around steaming cups of cocoa. I darted between their legs, weaving a path around wool stockings and leather boots. Hot chocolate splashed as someone yelped in surprise. In the confusion behind me, Harley skidded into the vendor's cart, sending marshmallows flying like startled doves. The vendor yelped. The tall man apologized. The dog shook himself, flinging droplets of cocoa from his fur, and bolted onward again. Ahead, though, the road cleared. The snow thickened into swirling curtains, softening the shapes of lampposts and buildings. The world turned dreamlike, as though a giant artist had washed the scene with milk. My breath puffed in delicate clouds. I began to feel that I could run forever, that I could dance across rooftops, leap over chimneys, and never tire. The rhythm of my boots turned into a song. Run, 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 as fast as you can. You can't catch me, But then the mist thickened into a veil so white I could not see my own feet. I slowed, unsure. The cold silence pressed close, as though the world held its breath. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. If cookies have hearts, mine was thundering like a drum. Shapes swirled in the haze. A shadow here, a flicker of red there. My pursuers were lost behind me somewhere in that whiteout. The only sound came from the snowflakes whispering against the ground. And then a laugh. Deep, warm, impossibly jolly. A laugh like the chiming of the biggest bell in the biggest clock tower, rolling out in echoes of pure cheer. Ho, ho, ho! Out of the pale swirl stepped a figure everyone, everywhere, knows. Close your eyes and you still know him. A fur-trimmed scarlet suit as red as holly berries. A beard white and clean as new snow. Eyes twinkling as though he truly kept the northern lights in his back pocket. Father Christmas. Saint Nicholas. Santa Claus himself. I stopped so suddenly my heels sliced twin grooves in the snow. I stared up, mouth open, icing dropping crumbs. Santa saw me and smiled. Well now, he boomed, voice so kind it wrapped around me like the bakery's ovens had. Look at you, cinnamon-scented sprinter. Quite the race you're running today. I swallowed the urge to faint. They want to eat me, I explained, panting. Santa's eyes sparkled. So they might, he chuckled. But not today. He crouched, held out a gloved hand. Fancy joining me on my rounds? Plenty of cookies and cakes will await me at Chimneys tonight. I won't eat you, yet I could surely use company. Something inside me, the part that had leaped at freedom, knew yes at once. Here was warmth, safety, and adventure all wrapped in one. I stepped onto Santa's mitten, feeling soft red wool under my boots. He lifted me lightly and set me upon his broad shoulder where the fur collar cushioned like a pillow. From this high perch I could see above the mist. I looked back. The helper girl and the man with the red scarf had slowed to a halt, staring in amazement. The dog wagged his tail, confusion replacing hunger. Snowflakes glittered in midair around them as though time itself had paused to watch. Off we go, Santa said. The mist parted ahead, revealing a shimmering sleigh parked by the curb, reindeer pawing the snow in impatience. Their harness bells jingled bright and clear. The sleigh's red sides gleamed like lacquered cherry wood, and golden runners curved beneath like the flowing lines of a ship's hull. Santa climbed aboard. I nestled against the deep velvet cushion near his boot. Hold fast, little friend, he advised. He snapped the reins once. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet and Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, and Rudolph. Light the way, my boy. The world seemed to drop away beneath us. We lifted from the street, gliding over rooftops, scattering snow from slanted eaves. The high street fell behind, the bakery's glowing windows shrinking to a warm in a sea of silver. The helper girl watched us until we slipped into clouds, her hand waving small and shy. For a moment I felt a pang of guilt. She had tried to save me from being eaten, after all. But then the sleigh surged forward into the night sky, and the world turned into wonder. What followed has filled more myths than ever reach paper. We skimmed tower tops in London, Rudolph's ruby nose bright against the cold dark sky. We zigzagged through Eiffel's iron bones. We slid along the edge of the Grand Canyon where moonlight painted canyon walls a ghostly orange. We swooped low over the Amazon rainforest where howler monkeys screeched greetings, and again over Australian deserts where the stars looked close enough to touch. Everywhere we stopped, Santa climbed down chimneys or slipped through keyholes. Stockings were filled, trees tucked with neatly wrapped surprises. On one rooftop, a small child, still half asleep, caught sight of us. The wonder in her eyes washed over me like the bakery warmth from which I'd fled, and I realized gifts were not just toys but sparks of hope. Every parcel was a tiny ember to melt snow in someone's heart. All night the sleigh kept moving. Eventually, rosy hints of dawn brushed the horizon. Snow clouds thinned. Santa guided the reindeer northward to the place where the world stretches like a white sheet tucked under a blue quilt. The cold felt sharper there, clean to the core. Hooves crunched onto a field of hard-packed snow outside a long wooden stable. Frost crept along the sleigh's rails as we decelerated. Sleigh bells shivered out one final ring, then silence folded over us. Rudy snorted, clouds of steam rising from his nose. Santa leaned back with a sigh, half weary, half proud. "All done for another year," he said. "Until next time," came a soft, warm voice. I turned. A woman stood in the snow with hair as white and soft as freshly whipped frosting. Her red coat matched Santa's, down to the fluffy cuffs. Only her clever smile hinted at mischief, a secret delight at the work of kindness. Santa's wife, I realized, Mother Christmas. I stretched my arms, feeling the numbness of long hours in the cold. I had fallen asleep on Santa's shoulder along the way, waking only when the sleigh bumped once or twice on rough air. My joints felt stiff, yet my heart, if gingerbread has one, felt as full as any chimney stocking. Mother Christmas stepped forward and offered her mittened palm. "Ride's over, but rest begins," she said. I stepped into her soft hand. She set me gently atop her shoulder, and even that small climb felt like scaling a friendly mountain. "Welcome home," she told me as she carried me across the snow. Up ahead, a cozy cottage glowed through the half-light. Smoke curled from a stout brick chimney. Icicles dangled from the roof in clear crystal daggers, but bright golden light spilled from every window, promising warmth. Inside, the cottage smelled of peppermint and pine, of chocolate and clove. A big stone fireplace crackled, biting back the lingering chill under my icing. Mother Christmas set me on a plush red cushion near the hearth. Sparks fluttered up the chimney like playful fireflies. An army of tiny wooden soldiers marched across the mantel, guarding garlands of evergreen. Candy canes dangled from hooks near the fire where wet mittens could be hung to dry. In that glow of red and orange, cinnamon's scent seemed to bloom anew within me, and I sighed, happy, safe, calm. Santa clomped in after tending to the reindeer, brushing snow from his shoulders. He removed his hat, revealing hair as white as sugar dust, and hung it on a peg shaped like a candy cane. "You need a name, my friend," he said, kneeling beside my cushion. "Something fitting." "I have one," I piped, my voice steady. "Cinnamon." The letters danced in the warm air, as satisfying to say as to smell. Santa and Mother Christmas beamed. "Then Cinnamon it is," she declared, her eyes sparkling like stars above snowdrifts. They tucked a tiny knitted blanket, striped red and white, around me. It was softer than any icing. As sleep tugged at me, I thought about the bakery's warm trays, the chilly streets, the chase, the mist, the sleigh. I remembered the helper's laugh, the dog's bark, the jingle of the young man's scarf whipping in the wind. I remembered the hush of clouds when the world below us slept. All those moments felt like pieces of hard candy swirling inside me, sweet and bright and full of promise. Before my eyes slipped closed, I whispered a vow to myself. This was not the end of my story. Tomorrow, and every tomorrow after, new adventures would rise like cinnamon steam from a fresh batch of gingerbread. Somewhere a bell would jingle, and I would follow its call. Somewhere a dog would bark, a child would laugh, a girl in a flour-dusted apron would smile up at the gray winter sky, and I, Cinnamon the gingerbread man, would be there, ready to run, ready to share warmth, ready to melt a little more snow from every heart I met. And with that thought, I snuggled into my cushion by the fire, the smell of peppermint mingling with cinnamon, the snap of burning pine folding around me like a lullaby. Outside, the North Pole wind sang over the snowdrifts. Inside, sleep settled over me like powdered sugar, soft and sweet and full of dreams yet to be tasted. I spend most days with a mug of black coffee never far from my right hand. It is my lever and fulcrum, a familiar anchor that steadies the rhythms of work, errands, and chores. But once the sun slips behind the tall pines that flank our apartment complex and the neighborhood hushes under porch lights, something inside me asks for gentler company, a drink that suggests patience instead of urgency. That is when I put the kettle on and reach for tea. Not the quick pouches that come 50 to a cardboard sleeve, though we keep an emergency stash for colds and midnight stomachaches, but true loose-leaf tea, curled leaves and brittle twigs that look like the sweepings from an herb garden yet bloom with color the second hot water touches them. I keep a squat glass jar of Earl Grey on the counter because its bergamot fragrance feels like an old friend, and beside it a small tin of Lady Grey for evenings when bergamot alone is too sharp and I want a whisper of lavender and Seville orange. There is a burlap pouch of dried ginger root as well, pale and knobby, a tonic my grandmother swore could mend the day's bruises on the body or the spirit. Those 3 teas are my small ceremony. Open the tin, breathe the aroma, warm a stoneware pot, wait, sip, breathe again. On the first Thursday of February, my wife, Allison, and I sank into that ritual after a long string of unsettled days. I had spent hours wrestling spreadsheets that refused to balance, and she had endured a department meeting about budget cuts that threatened 3 colleagues' positions. By 10 o'clock, the apartment was still except for the hum of the refrigerator. We decided on Lady Grey, a compromise between the comfort of Earl Grey and the bite of ginger. I filled the kettle, lit the gas flame, and the blue ring of fire glowed in the dim kitchen like a tiny sun. Allison gathered our thick-bottomed mugs and a dish of shortbread cookies. We planned to watch the season finale of a detective series we recorded the previous weekend, though half the time we ended up talking through episodes, pausing, rewinding, and laughing at how poorly we followed plotlines when we were tired. The kettle whistle had just begun to soften into that low warble that means another 10 seconds until a full shriek when a sudden, solid knock rattled the front door. Not the light rapping of a neighbor asking for sugar, but a quick 3-beat thump that hinted at urgency. The sound startled us both. Our building is tucked in the rear of the complex, and visitors after 9 are rare. I turned down the flame, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and stepped into the hallway. From the living room, Allison called, "Who on earth is that?" Her voice carried an edge of worry. "I'll know as soon as I open the door," I said, trying for calm, though my pulse had quickened. She shot me an expressive look, half teasing, half warning not to joke when someone might need help. I unlatched the deadbolt, swung the door inward, and found Michael Harris standing in the breezeway. Michael lives 2 floors above us in 3B, a unit tucked beneath the roof gables. He is a soft-spoken man in his early 30s who teaches middle school math. We occasionally meet in the parking lot and trade small talk about leaky gutters, noisy HVAC units, or the new barbecue place on Jones Street. His pug, Bean, waddled at his feet wearing a plaid harness and looking pleased with the world. Both of them were flushed by cold. Vapor curled from Michael's mouth each time he exhaled. "Oh my God! Did you see that?" Michael blurted before I could greet him. He paused, gulped air, realized he had interrupted my evening, and flashed an apologetic smile. "Sorry it's so late. I saw your lights and remembered you talking about Nova events in the parking lot a few months ago. I thought you'd want to know it happened. Something exploded in space, and it's brighter than the moon." His words tumbled together, but one phrase froze me. "It happened." I felt a jolt like static up my arms. "T. Coroni Borealis?" I asked, stepping closer. He nodded, eyes wide. "Bright as a street lamp. You can't miss it. I saw it when being stopped to sniff a mailbox." I slipped into shoes without socks, realized cold would bite, and doubled back for jeans, boots, and a lined jacket. Less than a minute later, I locked the apartment, mumbled to Allison that I'd be back, and hustled into the night. Michael and Bean waited in the breezeway. The overhead bulb cast silver shadows on the stairs. Beyond, the railing oaks clicked in a light breeze. We crossed the lot and climbed a grassy rise to Willow Creek Road, which runs east-west and offers an unbroken view of the northern horizon for several hundred yards. Streetlights are sparse there, one reason I often step outside on crisp nights to look for the Andromeda Galaxy or track meteor showers. The sky had been steel gray at dusk, but a cold front shoved the clouds south after midnight, leaving the firmament ink black and glittering. I craned my neck, scanning above the rooftops. Then I saw it, halfway between the familiar star Deneb and the crooked bow of Cassiopeia, a point of light that outshone every star except Sirius. It blazed like a diamond caught by a spotlight. My breath left in a single word: "Wow!" Michael tucked his hands in his pockets, following my gaze. Did it just explode? In our perception, yes. I kept my eyes locked on the nova even as I spoke. But in truth, we are seeing a flash that left that star about 3,000 years ago. Michael whistled softly. Makes you feel small. Bean sniffed a patch of dormant grass, unimpressed. I explained the basics. T Coronii Borealis is a recurrent nova, a binary system with a white dwarf star siphoning material from a red giant companion until runaway fusion causes a cataclysmic outburst. Astronomers predicted the next eruption might arrive this year or next, but predictions for such systems are slippery. My amateur astronomy buddies and I had traced its historical eruptions, 1866 and 1946, and swapped theories on online forums. I had even mentioned to Michael, during a random conversation near the mailboxes, that if we were lucky we might witness it in our lifetimes. While we discussed, footsteps and conversations drew closer. One by one, neighbors emerged from first-floor patios and upper-floor balconies, drawn by the sight of people clustered on the sidewalk under starlight. Almost everyone had a dog on a leash. Mrs. Chapman from 1C wore a turquoise robe and held a shivering terrier. 2 college students from 2A carried mugs that steamed in the cold. A lean man with earbuds tugged off one side and said, "What's happening?" "It's a nova," I explained, louder for the group. "A star called T Coronii Borealis in a constellation just above those pines." I pointed. Heads pivoted upward. A woman in fleece pajama pants asked, "Are we in danger?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "It's 3,000 light years away." The light started traveling when iron tools were new technology. I tried to add context. Imagine a cosmic postcard that says, "Boom," and it took 30 centuries to reach our mailbox. Nervous laughter scattered through the group. A few pulled out phones. I offered more detail. The way the star's brightness would likely fade over nights, the rare chance we had to see such a repeat performance, the difference between supernovae and novae. Someone asked if the radiation could harm us. I assured them our atmosphere protected us. I felt the subtle shift from neighbor to informal guide and welcomed it. Teaching is a hobby that sneaks out whenever astronomy comes up. Bean leaned against Michael's calf, perhaps bored by cosmic drama. Michael patted the pug's head. "Good boy. This is history." The dispersed glow from street lamps glazed Bean's dark coat, making him resemble an oversized raisin. I pulled my own phone, activated the night mode camera, and zoomed to maximum magnification. The nova still looked like a point, but I captured a time-stamped image anyway. February 2nd, 2025, 12:02 a.m., I announced. It felt important to record the moment, though no photograph could translate the emotion of seeing a star reborn. Our impromptu stargazing turned into a quiet vigil. Some neighbors drifted away after 10 minutes, others lingered. Neighbors sharing names they had never exchanged in daylight. Cold crept through boots and sleeves. Finally, someone admitted their fingers had gone numb. The spell broke. We nodded, murmured goodnight, promised to watch the sky again tomorrow. Michael and I headed back to our building, Bean trotting ahead. "Hard to believe that light left when pharaohs ruled Egypt," Michael said. "Makes tomorrow's class quiz feel less urgent." We reached the staircase. Michael scooped Bean with practiced ease. "His legs are only good for carpets," he joked. I smiled. He hesitated on the first step. "Let me know if you spot anything else cool up there." I told him about the International Space Station passes due on the 12th and 15th of the month, listing times and elevations. His eyebrows rose when I mentioned my plan to attempt a voice contact via the amateur radio repeater on board. "You really talked to someone through the ISS?" I nodded. "Twice, actually. My call sign is K4RLE. I've chatted with operators from Oklahoma and New Brunswick. All you need is a handheld transceiver, the right antenna, and precise timing. The ISS circles the Earth every 90 minutes. When it passes overhead, the signal path is clear for about 6 minutes." Michael adjusted Bean under one arm. "Mind if I tag along early on the 12th? I'll bring coffee." "Sure. Meet me outside at 6:25. I imagined explaining azimuth and elevation to a math teacher. It would be fun. We said goodnight. I watched him climb the 2 flights, small dog in arms, the stairwell light painting their shadows. Then I walked to our door, turning the key quietly. Inside, the apartment smelled of bergamot and sweet bread. Allison had dozed in the plush reading chair, one leg tucked beneath her. The television screen displayed the streaming service's Idol logo. I closed the door gently, shrugged off my jacket, and tiptoed to the stove. The kettle water had cooled, so I refilled and set it to boil again. The flame flickered. Allison stirred. "How was it?" she whispered, voice groggy. "Cool," I said, and kissed the top of her head. I remeasured tea, watching the dark bits tumble into the infuser. When the kettle beeped, I poured the water, inhaled fragrant steam, and let the leaves dance. We sipped quietly on the couch with a blanket over our knees, watching an old episode of MS*H in which Hawkeye tried to fix everything with a joke. Laughter on the screen blended with the hush in our living room. Outside, somewhere above the pines, a star's centuries-old outcry shimmered against the cold, and I thought how the universe keeps sending us reminders that time is wide, that stories travel farther than our doubts. When the credits rolled, we folded the blanket, rinsed the mugs, and went to bed, carrying the Nova's light behind our eyelids like a shared secret. I once believed that summers on my mother's side of the family were nothing more than a string of harmless traditions. Porch sitting, gossip trading, and one lanky orange tomcat stalking hens that had escaped their coops. I could not see how every detail, every hiss of Coca-Cola fizzing over ice, every soprano squeal of a rusty screen door, every lazy orbit the box fan made as it pushed damp air across a small, green-painted parlor, was storing itself inside me. Only later, after funerals and moves and surgeries and long silences, did I understand that what felt ordinary back then was stitching itself into the strongest fabric I would ever own. The house at the edge of North Carolina's Piedmont belonged to 3 generations of my people before it belonged to anyone else. In official records, it was a 1-story clapboard farmhouse with a tin roof, warped window casements, and a foundation of brick pillars that had settled unevenly into red clay. To us, it was simply the porch, because the porch, painted a shade between slate and duck-egg blue, was wider than the living room and twice as important. Every hot weather ritual happened there. Shelling peas, letting biscuits cool, trading news about whose car threw a rod and whose youngest floated gum wrappers down the creek. At 10 years old, I fit into the corner rocker like a wren fits its nest. Higgins, the cat who belonged to no one, would appear without warning and drape himself across my knees like an arrogant fur blanket. Higgins was all muscle and lazy menace. An orange beast with scarred ears, a tail thick as a chimney brush, and gold eyes that could pin a barn rat in its tracks. When he stalked across the porch rail, he looked less like a family pet and more like a tiger who had lost his kingdom but not his pride. On one afternoon in late July, the heat was so dense it felt like an extra layer of clothing. A small breeze managed to find the porch, threading itself through the lattice supports and licking damp hair off everyone's foreheads. My mother sat near the doorway nursing an iced tea, frowning at something my Aunt Karen was teasing her about. My aunts, middle sister Karen and eldest sister Elaine, had been teasing my mother since she quit wearing pigtails, so the routine felt as old as the porch steps. They ribbed her about the curl that dangled too close to her eye, about whether she had iced the chess pie long enough, about how her gentle Carolina vowels sounded just a shade more Appalachian since she'd married my father and moved out to the foothills. My mother rolled her eyes but let them talk. The youngest sister knew how to survive a chorus of older siblings. I half listened, half dozed until Higgins went rigid on my thighs. His ears flattened. His tail switched side to side like a clock pendulum losing patience. I followed his gaze and spotted a single brown hen sprinting along the rutted street that paralleled the porch rail. The hen looked panicked and dignified all at once, wings half outstretched, toes scratching at the powdery dust thrown by weeks without rain. Before Higgins could leap, our neighbor Mrs. Hampton, a tall woman with arms as strong as porch columns, stepped out from behind a wisteria vine. She plucked the hen out of mid-gallop with a quick, easy motion, tucking the bird to her waist. The feathers fluffed. The hen settled. Mrs. Hampton laughed, called an apology for disturbing our evening repose. and ambled back toward her yard. Higgins's tail drooped. He let out one short, offended chirp and resettled atop my legs, deciding the collapse of his hunting plans was no reason for a cat to do anything strenuous. Across the porch, Uncle George leaned forward in his wicker rocker, forearms resting on bird-thin knees, glasses sliding down a nose that had grown sharper each year. Uncle George was the family grammarian. He taught Southern literature at the university in Raleigh 2 semesters a year and spent the third lecturing his relatives on why double negatives were the devil's own invention. All evening, he had been tormenting my cousin Reese, who at 7 years old pronounced 10 like Tayun. George would dangle arithmetic questions just to provoke the elongated vowel, then slap his knee in satisfaction when Reese supplied it. The rest of the family reacted as we usually did, half amused, half exasperated. Aunt Karen finally scolded, "Stop, George," but he only waved a forgiving hand, promising that proper enunciation would serve the boy someday. My older cousins had fled at the earliest chance. 2 years earlier, I idolized my cousin Alex beyond explanation. She was 16 that summer and had perfected the ability to storm off in a huff that read as high drama to adults but pure rebellion to younger onlookers like me. Her car, a forest green Ford Explorer with mismatched doors, was freedom incarnate. One humid dusk, she let me ride shotgun while she did donuts in the Kmart parking lot. The tires sang against cracked pavement, and the thrill lodged so deep in my ribs that I can still taste dust whenever I remember the spinning lights above the empty storefronts. Night around the farmhouse was its own anthology of rumors, mostly about the house being haunted. My great-grandmother had died beneath its roof 6 years before I was born, yet relatives insisted her small, fierce footsteps still climbed the narrow staircase after midnight, sniffing at furniture she believed we neglected to dust. I half believed them because Mr. Magoo, a nearly blind Pekingese who had lost one eyeball to a bramble and most of his hearing to age, refused to cross the upstairs landing. When I needed a bathroom break after dark, I forced Mr. Magoo to accompany me as a canine talisman. He complied, though it was Higgins I would have preferred for courage. Higgins, sadly, abandoned any human foolish enough to wander hallways after sundown. Days developed their own momentum. Morning began with the whine of cicadas, did not bother with a cool noon, and rolled into the kind of swollen evening where a thundercloud bulged but never broke. We, the children, found adventures too reckless to confess until we were grown. Bart, eldest cousin, favorite of uncles, and self-appointed daredevil, believed it his sacred duty to test the limits of my mortality. He believed lake water taught swimming best when you were tossed from the tube at 40 miles an hour. He believed unregistered motorcycles built from scavenged engines counted as mechanical masterpieces so long as the throttle opened and the brakes sometimes worked. Bart considered the possibility of injury part of Noon's natural scenery, like gnats and sunburn. The adults let him run mostly unchecked, assuming his mischief prepared him for some vague future where cunning mattered more than caution. At supper time, the porch morphed into a small-town newsroom. Neighbors wandered over uninvited, plates in hand so they could sample whatever sides lay steaming under netted cloth. Each offered gossip. Louise's eyesight was fading so badly she mistook squirrels for raccoons and raccoons for burglars. Someone had finally hidden her BB gun before she shot an electric meter. Great Aunt Mary Jo insisted on driving despite cataracts. Therefore, my cousin Bart disabled her old Pontiac once a month by pulling the distributor cap so she could not roll it into oncoming traffic. In our world, conspiracies of kindness were normal. We sabotaged tires, removed spark plugs, and rerouted errands solely to keep people alive while letting them believe nothing had changed. In that swirl of lazy misadventure, Alex remained my compass. She possessed everything I longed for in preteen life. Mosquito netting hung like a gauzy curtain around her bed, incense sticks shaped like twisted branches, posters of alternative bands with names I could not pronounce, a rabbit named Iggy, 3 gerbils in a rickety aquarium, and a tiny leopard gecko that licked condensation from popsicle sticks. She knew which gas station sold pizza by the slice at midnight if you pulled around back and tapped on the employee door. She perfected sneaking out, padded through damp grass barefoot just to howl at the moon, and let me follow if I vowed not to snitch. The pizza was cardboard flavored, yet because Alex ate it, each bite tasted rebellious. Years unspooled. Grandchildren became students, students became employees, employees returned each summer to transform back into grandchildren again. The porch never aged out of usefulness. I drag raced my mother's Toyota on the same quarter stretch of back road where Alex had once burned donuts. My mother, now the permissive elder, leaned out the passenger window to shout encouragement, White Russian cocktail sloshing onto the door frame. Reese's Mountain twang mellowed, but Uncle George's delight in pointing it out never did. He mended red pencil scrawls across my college essays, skiing whenever I dangled a modifier, yet melted into nonsensical baby talk if someone set an infant in his arms. We believed such constancy would last, because we had not learned how quickly a family's landscape can rearrange. We discover that lesson one funeral at a time. Uncle George collapsed first. A stroke so sudden it did not bruise his features, just unplugged the electricity that kept his voice and laughter animated. My daughter was 6 months old then, fat-cheeked, irresistible. I had dreamed of watching Uncle George's formidable grammar dissolve into coos whenever he cradled her. But death appeared on my mother's birthday and stole the future scene. My mother did not cry. Her autistic brain cataloged dates and said, with factual resignation, "Well, now my birthday is ruined forever." I murmured condolence, rubbed circles on her shoulder, and went outside to weep alone so she would not need to decode the messy tangle of grief in my voice. We had hardly cleared the casserole dishes from the funeral when Alex phoned. She was 38, still compiling playlists, still rescuing stray reptiles. Doctors had found ovarian cancer so advanced they spoke in percentages that rounded downward too quickly. Chemo slashed her hairline, but she knitted leg warmers for my toddler anyway. Bright stripes of yarn as soft as the nets that once draped over her teenage bed. 2 months later, she slipped away on a sterile hospital morning. My mother relayed the news over speakerphone because COVID protocols trapped us in separate cities. Her voice cracked only once. The last thing Alex said to the doctor was, "I'm scared," and the doctor told her it was okay to eat every flavor of ice cream in the cafeteria if she wanted. I pressed my face into a pillow and screamed into cotton until my throat burned raw, until memories flooded like film reels. Me at 10, Higgins's warm weight, the porch, Uncle George's cackle, Alex's Explorer spinning. I tasted the dust of tires on asphalt, smelled leather-bound book candles, heard Bart's roar from the lake as my tube hit wake and sent me skimming across chop. Loss uncovered meanings I had been too young, too hurried, too alive to notice. Those mundane porch hours, the chicken sprint, the neighbor's laugh, the lazy cat tail whisking my Coke straw, were never ordinary. They formed an embassy of belonging. In each sideways glance, each playful insult, each plate passed hand to hand without fanfare, love hid in plain sight. It lived in deviled egg platters, sweat beading under kitchen towel tents. It lived in the groan of old springs beneath the swing where Aunt Karen balanced a tray of iced tea glasses. It lived in the hush after dusk when the first cicada fired its raspy overture and the entire family sat still enough that we heard our pulse echo in our ears. I understand now that memory behaves like carbonated soda in July. It starts under pressure, hissing invisibly in the bottle while you take everything for granted. The porch rails, the grammar jokes, the incompetent hen. Then time lifts the cap. The fizz erupts. Laughter too loud, color too bright. A momentary sweetness so intense it burns. Spill half of it before you realize you loved the taste more than anything. Only when the glass stands empty does nostalgia settle, sticky and permanent, across the table. The porch stands quieter these days. Higgins disappeared one winter night and never returned, perhaps succumbing to coyotes, perhaps ascending to cat legend. The haunted staircase still creaks, but I no longer wonder if my great-grandmother stomps there. The sound may be nothing more than old boards swelling in humidity, or maybe it is my memory stamping its foot, warning me not to forget the small epic of an ordinary family suspended in summer heat. I visit when I can, plug fans into outlets Uncle George insisted on rewiring himself, and sit on the top step while my daughter, for now, feeds cracked corn to a new generation of hens. She laughs when a cinnamon-colored one pecks her shoelace, and for a fraction of a second the porch rewinds. The wind stirs a forgotten curl over my mother's brow, and the universe bends like a tuning fork struck against the rim of a glass bottle. Time gentles, exactly as it did when I was 10 and half asleep beneath a killer cat and a summer wind. I understand why scientists call relativity theory elegant, because in certain places, porches and parking lots and hospital rooms, time will always expand or contract to fit the freight of love we carry. The porch held ours easily until it had to let go. Now the weight rides inside me. I carry it forward, into new summers, across porchless apartments, through nights of sentence fragments Uncle George might mark incorrect. And I whisper thanks to the breezes I cannot see, for a childhood given, for cousins who dared, for hours that fermented into the purest sweetness memory can pour.